What if the snap of a twig could seal your fate? What if a single accusation could plunge you into the abyss of unspeakable dread? Witchcraft isn't just a label, it's a noose, a curse, a ticket to a fiery end where your screams become nothing more than a chorus for the gathering crowd. Welcome to a world where your neighbor's envy could ignite a witch hunt. You think your TikTok drama is intense? Try being dragged into the square, shackled, as the townsfolk shout your name like it's a death chant. Picture this, a rainy night, fog curling around your feet like a serpent, whispers of curses swirling in the air. What's worse? Being accused, or watching the crowd's eyes widen as they slowly piece together their own paranoia. They don't need proof. A flick of your wrist, a crooked smile, suddenly you're an agent of darkness. It's a game of survival where the rules are written in blood. Let's break it down. Torture tables weren't just for medieval horror flicks, they were the main event. Imagine sitting across from a judge whose face looks like a melted candle, ready to condemn you for the slightest infraction, like having a cat or being too wise. You know that feeling when you overhear gossip? Now multiply that by 1,000. Words, twisted into daggers, stab at the very fabric of your existence. And what about the trials? A bizarre spectacle where logic takes a nosedive. If you float, you're a witch. If you sink, well, guess what? You're a martyr. Talk about a no-win scenario. Try explaining to your mother that you didn't cast any spells, she'll just shake her head in disbelief, thinking the devil's work has tainted her bloodline. You're left alone, gripping the slippery edge of sanity, while the crowd chants your demise like a twisted hymn. The absurdity is rich. You've heard of cancel culture? This is the original witch hunt. Social media likes replaced by pitchforks and torches. One wrong word, and you're toast. Or worse, a charred husk of your former self, sacrificed on the altar of fear and superstition. Now, let's sprinkle in a dash of dark humor. Ever tried explaining to the executioner why your potion was just herbal tea? No? Well, they're not in the mood for your alibis. Their eyes are glazed over with the thrill of the hunt. You become the punchline in a gruesome joke that no one dares to laugh at. As the sun sets on your fate, the shadows dance, mocking your every misstep. You realize, with gut-wrenching clarity, that in the eyes of a village, truth is irrelevant. Accusation is the only currency that matters. The real witchcraft? It's the fear that binds a community, the whispers that ignite hysteria. So, dear reader, as you ponder these horrors, ask yourself, would you risk your life for a misunderstanding? Or worse, a snicker? In a world where innocence is no shield, every glance, every word, could drag you into a nightmare. The question lingers, thick as smoke, what price will you pay for freedom? A cold wind slithered through the village, curling its icy fingers around the stones of the church, wrapping around the gnarled branches of the trees that stood sentinel over lives teetering on the edge of madness. I remember the whispers, how they clung to the air, thick as fog, slithering into the ears of the fearful, the desperate, the hopeful. Witch, they cried, their voices a cacophony of rage and dread, as if it were a mantra that could conjure safety from the abyss. There, in the heart of it all, stood Eliza, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She wasn't just a woman, she was a mother, a daughter, a sister, her spirit a tapestry woven with joy and sorrow. The village had once embraced her laughter, but now it felt like a noose tightening around her neck. The air was charged with a darkness that pulsed with every heartbeat, every breath she took. I remember how she clutched her child to her chest, the soft cooing of the baby muffled by the growing din, a siren song turned into a death knell. Across the square, Thomas stood, his hands trembling at his sides. He was a man torn between duty and desire, between love and fear. He had always admired Eliza from afar, the way she moved through the world with a grace that seemed otherworldly, as if she danced with the very shadows that now threatened to consume her. He felt the weight of the accusations pressing against his chest, squeezing the breath from his lungs. What if they're right? The thought gnawed at him, a rat feasting on the remnants of hope. Voices rose like smoke, curling around the corners of the square. She spoke to the moon, someone shouted, I saw her in the night. Dancing. The crowd surged, a restless tide of fury and fear, and Eliza's heart raced, pounding against her ribcage like a prisoner desperate for freedom. She didn't dance with the moon, she danced with her son in the quiet of night, twirling him through the stars of their humble existence. But truth was a fragile thing in this world, brittle as the thin ice that cloaked the river in winter, shattering with the slightest touch. "Eliza!" Thomas's voice cut through the chaos, a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. He pushed through the throng, desperation carving lines into his face. "They're wrong." "You're not, stay back," she hissed, fear wrapping around her words. "You don't understand." And in those 3 words, her reality deepened, an abyss where nightmares lurked. The witch hunts weren't mere accusations, they were the very pulse of grief and desperation that throbbed through the village. They were born of sickness, of loss, of untamed fear that festered in the hearts of those who had lost so much. Around them, the shadows danced, twisting and taunting, until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, an omen. The air crackled with energy, as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Eliza felt it, the weight of generations piled on her shoulders, the ghosts of women whose laughter had become screams echoing through the ages. They had been mothers, too, lovers, dreamers, crushed under the weight of ignorance and vilification. I remember the smell of smoke, acrid and bitter, as a pyre was hastily constructed at the edge of the square. Those flames would lick the sky, consuming everything in their path, a finality that made her stomach churn. She thought of all the women before her, each one a note in a somber symphony, each accusation a dagger, each execution a note plucked from the strings of a life unfulfilled. And then there was Marjorie, her voice like sweet honey, rising above the din. "Eliza is a witch. I saw her." The words twisted like a serpent, and Eliza felt every eye in the crowd turn toward her, judging, condemning. Marjorie stood not on the basis of truth but of a fear that clawed and scratched at her own soul. It was a moment of betrayal that rang louder than any bell tolling for a lost life. "Marjorie," Eliza pleaded, "please," but the plea hung in the air like a heavy fog, unacknowledged, as the crowd fed on the frenzy, their faces contorted with rage and fear. Thomas's heart raced, caught in the crossfire of his love and the suffocating weight of conformity. He felt as if he were drowning, watching the love of his life being pulled under by the whirlpool of madness. "What if you're wrong?" he shouted, voice raw with emotion. "What if it's you?" But the words were swallowed by the howling wind, leaving behind nothing but echoes of doubt. The clock tower struck, its chime reverberating through the square, marking the moments that felt like eternity. A weight settled over Eliza, a sense of finality that felt as heavy as the stones that would soon encase her. She looked into Thomas's eyes, searching for a glimmer of understanding, a sign that she wouldn't face this alone. But all she saw was fear, the fear of losing everything. A child's cry pierced the air, a sound that cut through the chaos. It was a reminder that this wasn't just a battle of accusations, it was a fight for survival, for love in a world turned cruel. And in that moment, Eliza's resolve crystallized. She wouldn't go down without a fight. But as they closed in, shadows lengthening, the whispers grew louder. "Witch! Witch!" The word became a chant, a rallying cry for justice sought through blood. And she understood then, that true horror lay not in the flames, but in the hearts of those around her, the darkness that festered when fear eclipsed reason. The crowd surged, hearts pounding as one. The universe watched, a silent witness to the unfolding tragedy, two souls intertwined, battling against the inevitable tide of history. I remember thinking that night of how fear could twist love into something monstrous, how the lines between right and wrong blurred until all that remained was raw, primal survival. In that moment, Eliza became a symbol, a ghost haunting the very fabric of existence. The crowd was a sea of faces, twisted by the past and poisoned by fear, and as one they surged toward an uncertain fate. The air crackled with something unnameable, an energy that felt like the universe holding its breath, a tension so thick, it cut like a knife through the darkness. And as the first spark caught, igniting the pyre, I gazed into the heart of the fire and realized that the flames didn't just consume flesh, they devoured the very essence of humanity, leaving behind nothing but ashes and echoes. The night wore on, and the shadows grew deeper, whispering forgotten stories of women lost to time, waiting for the wrong to rise once more. I remember the fear, the hope, the desperation, the very essence of what it meant to be human, teetering on the brink of annihilation. It was a moment frozen in time, a cascade of emotions erupting into chaos, a reminder that history is an unending cycle, a dance with the very shadows that threaten to consume us all. As the world spun on, we were left to wonder, when would it end, and could we ever truly escape our own darkness? The church bell tolls, its somber peal slicing through the stale air, reverberating in the chest like a heartbeat, a grim reminder of what lurks beneath a veneer of piety. I stand in the shadow of the old stone church, the sun struggling to pierce the grey clouds that hang low like a funeral shroud. The townsfolk shuffle by, eyes cast down, whispers trailing like smoke. They know. I know. We all know. Miriam, a woman with wild eyes that dance like flames, her hands trembling as she clutches the frayed edges of her apron, stands before the gallows, her heart a pendulum swinging between despair and defiance. Her husband, Thomas, hangs from the noose, a lifeless marionette swinging in the wind. Just yesterday, they called him a sorcerer, a witch, just because he dared to question the fervent dogma that wrapped around their community like a noose itself. The memory of his laughter echoes in her mind, a haunting melody that now feels like a dirge. I remember, she whispers to the morning mist, I remember him telling stories of the stars, how they dance for joy and sorrow. Now, they only weep for the lost. Across the square, Father Ambrose stands, his face a mask of iron and conviction, the holy book clutched to his chest like a shield against the encroaching darkness. The townspeople see a man of God, but I see the trembling hands beneath his robe, the sweat beading on his brow. He is a prisoner of his own faith, caught in the crosshairs of divine love and human frailty. We must cleanse the evil, he declares, his voice a thunderstorm that rumbles through the crowd. But deep down, I sense the flicker of doubt. What if we are the evil? I want to scream. But the words die on my lips, swallowed by the repressive silence. Look! The witch, a voice calls, sharp as a knife, slicing through the air. Eyes dart to Miriam, the accusation hanging heavy, thick with the weight of judgment. They can smell her fear, the sweet tang of desperation. In that moment, she feels the world collapse around her, the ground trembling beneath the burden of sin. I can see it in her eyes, the heartache, the betrayal. I am no witch, she cries, but the crowd is a beast, ravenous for blood, driven by the relentless hunger for scapegoats. The church looms above, a sentinel, watching, judging, waiting. I remember the days before the fire, before the insatiable greed for purity consumed the town. We laughed, we danced, we dared to dream under the stars that now seem to mock us. I can still taste the bitter remnants of regret, the echoes of laughter turning into gasps of horror. The church, once a sanctuary, became a crucible, where faith morphed into fanaticism, and love twisted into hate. Father Ambrose stands at the altar, his shadow stretching like a dark omen across the stone floor, as he preaches fire and brimstone, painting vivid pictures of hell for those who dare to stray. Evil lurks in the hearts of men, he intones, his voice rising, fueled by the frenzy he creates. I watch as he ignites the flames of fear, whipping the crowd into a tempest. The devil walks among us, masquerading as our neighbors, our friends. Each word drips with a venom that seeps into their souls, corrupting their hearts, turning friends into foes, and love into betrayal. Miriam's fingers twitch, remembering the warmth of Thomas's hand, the way they wove dreams together like threads of golden sunlight. Now, he hangs, a marionette severed from his strings, and the world around her is a swirling storm of chaos. What have we done? She whispers to the void, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked cheeks. The town, once so vibrant, now feels like a ghostly echo of its former self, love replaced by suspicion. Father Ambrose's gaze pierces through the gathering, fixing on Miriam with the intensity of a predator spotting its prey. I can see the certainty in his eyes, the belief that he is an instrument of divine will, a soldier in the battle against the unseen enemy. This is our chance, his voice booms, reverberating like thunder, to purge the wickedness that plagues our souls. The crowd roars, a cacophony of fear and zeal, drowning out reason and compassion, transforming into a mindless horde. In the distance, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows that creep along the cobblestone streets, wrapping around the townsfolk like a shroud. I can feel the chill settle in the air, a prelude to the horrors that are about to unfold. Miriam stands alone now, the ground beneath her forming a chasm between love and loss, sanity and madness. She glances up at the gallows, the rope swaying gently as if beckoning her to join Thomas in the void. Will they remember us, she thinks, or will we be lost to the tides of history, just another casualty of faith? As the gallows loom larger, the crowd pushes forward, their fervor igniting like a runaway wildfire. I can feel the heat of their rage, the way it prickles against my skin, the palpable tension that wraps around us all like a vice. I remember, Miriam cries out, her voice cutting through the air, raw and fierce. I remember love. I remember laughter. But her words fall on deaf ears, swallowed by the howling wind and the darkening sky. Father Ambrose raises his hands, a gesture of divine authority, his face illuminated by the last flickers of daylight. Let the Spirit guide us, let the truth be revealed, he declares, but the truth is collapsing, buried beneath layers of fear and bloodlust. The crowd grows restless, the air thick with anticipation, the storm brewing within them, ready to unleash chaos. And as the sun sinks below the horizon, darkness envelops the town, a suffocating shroud that promises no respite. The bell tolls again, its sound echoing in my bones, a reminder that in this world, faith can become a weapon, and love can turn to ashes. The line between good and evil blurs, and in the heart of the storm, Miriam stands, trembling, defiant. The echoes of history whisper in the shadows, urging the world to remember, to bear witness, as the reckoning approaches. We are caught in a maelstrom of beliefs, love twisted by the very faith that was meant to save us. And with every heartbeat, we spiral toward the abyss, unsure if we shall ever emerge. The air was thick with tension, a suffocating cloak of dread wrapped around the village square, where the gallows loomed like a vulture overhead, waiting for its feast. I remember the way the sun slipped behind a curtain of clouds, casting shadows that twisted and writhed like the very souls of the condemned. It was a day like any other, yet everything felt wrong, as if the earth itself had lost its balance. The murmurs of the crowd were a low hum, punctuated by the occasional shriek of a terrified child or the soft snickers of those who reveled in the chaos. Elena stood at the forefront, her heart pounding like a drum against her rib cage. She was a woman caught between love and fear, her spirit tethered to the man who had been accused, an accusation born not from evidence, but the venomous whispers of envy. Thomas, her husband, was a gentle soul, a farmer who spoke to the wind as if it were a friend, whose laughter rang through the fields like the sweetness of ripe apples. But now he stood there, cloaked in chains, the weight of 1,000 falsehoods pressing down upon him. Witch, they cried, the word like a blade slicing through the air, sharp and unforgiving. The townsfolk had turned, their faces twisted in a grotesque mask of judgment. I remember how their eyes glinted, not with righteousness, but with a primal hunger for spectacle, a desire to witness the drama of blood and betrayal. It was a theater of the absurd, yet here we were, the players unaware of the role each would ultimately play. The trial began, but what did it matter? There was no justice here, only a parade of torment. The judge, a man whose own heart was lost in the darkness of ambition, banged his gavel hard enough to shatter the fragile silence. We will see the truth revealed, he boomed, and his voice echoed like thunder in the lungs of the crowd. But truth, as we know, is an elusive creature, often cloaked in shadows. I remember the smell of sweat and fear mingling in the air, heavy and acrid. The townsfolk crammed closer, eyes wide and mouths agape, as if they were witnessing a performance, not a condemnation. And yet in that moment, I felt the stirrings of something darker, an insatiable curiosity and a sense of impending doom that crushed me under its weight. I was drawn to the spectacle, a moth to the flame, even as my heart screamed against it. Elena's eyes locked onto Thomas's, a silent plea smouldering between them, a promise that transcended the chains that bound him. I could see the flicker of doubt in her heart, the fear of losing him to the very flames they were so eager to stoke. She was a woman forged from the fire of adversity, yet the shackles of societal expectation threatened to extinguish her spirit. The crowd's jeers clawed at her sanity, each taunt another piece of her heart torn asunder. The procedures of the trial unfolded with terrifying precision, accusations hurled like stones, witnesses summoned like puppets on a string. I remember the man who claimed to have seen Thomas speaking to the devil in the dead of night, his eyes wide with paranoia, the truth twisting like a shadow in the grasp of deception. The judge, a connoisseur of chaos, fed on the frenzy, his gavel falling with the finality of fate. And then there was Mary, a woman whose laughter once rang bright, now reduced to a quivering wisp of fear. She had once been a friend to Elena, but fear is a cruel master, and it wrapped its icy fingers around her heart. She stood among the accusers, her voice laced with bitterness as she spoke of dark omens and cursed harvests, her betrayal a knife that cut deep. I could see the regret in her eyes, a fleeting glimpse of warmth eclipsed by the fog of fear that enveloped her, yet she could not turn back. Witch, they bellowed again, the word echoing like a death knell. A chant of hatred that seeped into the very bones of the earth. The crowd swayed like a field of wheat in a storm, hungry for blood, for retribution. Elena's resolve wavered as the trial grew more fevered. She felt her sanity slip, a tightrope dancer with no safety net beneath her. Would she run to save Thomas, or would she remain an unwilling witness to his demise? Then came the moment, the turning tide. A witness, a child, frail and trembling, stepped forward, her voice a mere whisper. I saw the shadows. I saw her dancing, the weight of her words fell like a hammer. I saw the devil. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Elena's heart clenched, the fabric of truth unraveling around her. Was it a mere slip of a child's imagination, or a twisted reveal of something she feared to confront? I remember the way the world faded around me, the edges of reality blurring into a nightmare. The court became a cacophony, a dizzying swirl of accusations and defenses, yet there remained a singular thread that bound them all, the thirst for power, the need to control, to eliminate the other. Who would rise and who would fall? The stakes were high, and the price of survival was blood. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the gathering, I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath my feet, a drumbeat of inevitability. The tension thickened, wrapping around us like a noose, squeezing tighter with every moment. It was a dark ballet, a swirling dance of fear and desperation, where lines blurred and lives shattered. Elena was at the heart of it, her emotions a tempest. In that moment, she was no longer just a woman in love, she was a symbol, a beacon of defiance against the tide of injustice. In her eyes, I saw fury, heartbreak, and an unyielding spirit that longed for freedom. The gallows loomed, a spectre of finality, but I could feel the fire in her heart burning brighter than any flame. She would fight. She would not let Thomas drift into the night without a battle. And as the crowd roared, as the chains clattered and the shadows lengthened, I was left hanging in the balance, caught between despair and hope, waiting for the moment when the darkness would either consume us all or spark a fire that could not be extinguished. The witch trial had begun, and within its tangled web of accusation, love, and fear, I felt reality slip away, a haunting spectre whispering promises of doom and redemption. The air crackled with tension, sharp as a freshly drawn blade. A crowd gathered, faces a patchwork of fear, anger, and exhilaration, their breaths hitching in an anxious symphony. In the center stood Elizabeth, eyes wide, heart pounding, a tempest of dread wrapping its icy fingers around her throat. A moment ago, she was merely a woman, a mother, a widow trying to scrape by in a world that had turned hostile. Now, she was a sorceress, a creature of the night, fingers painted with the blood of innocence, accused of weaving curses into the very fabric of the town. The prosecutor, William, loomed large, his presence a dark shadow eclipsing any glimmer of hope. Sallow and gaunt, he carried the weight of the townsfolk's fears on his shoulders, a grim reaper in a poorly tailored suit. His voice, sharp as the wind that howled outside, sliced through the murmur of the crowd. This woman, this witch, has snared the souls of your children. She has turned the heavens against you, summoned demons from their quiet graves. His eyes glinted with something that teetered between righteous fury and a hunger for vengeance, and I felt the thrill of the crowd surge like a tidal wave, pulling Elizabeth beneath the weight of their collective dread. I remember the first time I saw the flare of madness in the eyes of an accuser. It was a flicker, a moment where the world hung suspended, and I was left breathless, like I'd caught a glimpse of a ghost. They fed on fear, these accusers, drawing strength from whispers, shadows, and the secrets they spun from the silence of the night. Rebecca, a girl barely old enough to know love or heartache, stood there among them, trembling, her hands clawed against her chest. I saw her, she shrieked, her voice a wild animal trying to break free from a trap. I saw her speaking to the devil. She promised him my soul. The words hung in the air, a noose tightening around Elizabeth's neck. She was a woman of flesh and blood, not a demon conjured from the depths of hell. Yet, in that moment, as accusations flew like arrows dipped in venom, the crowd seemed to forget the woman they once knew. Instead, they painted her as monstrous, an embodiment of their darkest fears. "Look at her!" William spat, his finger jabbing like a spear towards Elizabeth. "Look at the witch in our midst. Do you not feel her darkness? The chill that seeps into your bones." The crowd shivered. I could see it in their eyes, the flicker of doubt, the gnawing of conscience, quickly swallowed by the need for scapegoats, for someone to bear their burdens. I had my own demons to contend with, buried beneath layers of guilt and nostalgia. I remember my mother's warnings, her gentle trembling hands guiding me away from the shadows. "Stay close," she would say, her voice a soothing balm against the chill of the world outside. "The darkness is hungry, and it feeds on fear." I should have listened. Now, I watched as Elizabeth, an echo of my mother's spirit, stood alone, a flickering candle in a storm, and I was paralyzed, trapped in the silence of my own cowardice. Then, as the accusation spiraled out of control, the defender emerged, an unlikely hero cloaked in mystery. Thomas, an old man with the wildness of a storm in his eyes, stepped forward. "You will not silence her. You will not snatch her soul away in the name of your petty fears." His voice cracked like thunder, shattering the oppressive weight of the crowd's judgment. He was a relic of a time long past, a man who knew the heart of the world lay not in the blooded hands of prosecutors, but in the quiet strength of truth. I remember watching him, fierce and unwavering, as he spoke not to the crowd but to their souls. Witchcraft is not a sin. It is a dance with the cosmos, a communion with the spirits of the earth. You fear what you do not understand. Each word dripped with passion, igniting the flickering candle of hope in Elizabeth's eyes, even as the storm raged around her. She was no longer just a woman on trial, she became a symbol of defiance against the tide of ignorance that threatened to swallow her whole. The crowd shifted, wavering between anger and curiosity, their eyes darting like frightened sparrows. I felt a sliver of hope, small yet fierce. Could it be possible that truth might rise like a phoenix from the ashes of fear? As the confrontation escalated, the tension thickened the air, wrapping around us like a suffocating shroud. William's face twisted with fury, the truth a bitter taste in his mouth. He could not bear to lose his grip on the narrative he had woven so carefully. "You're in league with her. You're just as wicked," he screamed, desperation clawing at his throat. But Thomas wouldn't yield. He stood tall, the shadows dancing around him, the very essence of the night itself. "You mistake fear for strength," he rumbled, his voice a deep echo that rippled through the crowd. "You think you can quell the darkness by snuffing out the light. But it's your own hearts that are rotting, not hers." Elizabeth, caught in the storm of their words, felt the weight of her impending doom pressing down on her like a coffin lid. I could see it in her eyes, the flickers of hope dying, crushed beneath the weight of accusation and despair. And yet, in that moment, she stood straighter, as if the very earth beneath her feet whispered promises of courage. "Let them come," she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "Let them say what they will. I am more than their fear. I will not be a ghost in my own life." But as the confrontation spiraled, I felt the chilling fingers of fate wrap around us like a cloak. The crowd surged forward, anger blinding them to the truth, their cries drowning out Elizabeth's voice, their resolve hardening. I could feel the heartbeat of the earth beneath us, a distant warning against the torrent of chaos. The echoes of their accusations reverberated through the night, the haunting melody of despair and fury. Each heartbeat was a reminder of the fragility of life, the stubbornness of fear that refused to let go. The shadows grew longer, creeping in from the edges, wrapping the gathering in a cloak of uncertainty. I remember the darkness, the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest. The story was far from over, it hung in the air, suspended in a delicate balance between light and shadow, innocence and guilt. As the echoes of their voices faded, the night stood still, a world on the brink, caught in the snare of its own making, yearning for a truth that seemed forever just beyond reach. And with that, the confrontation lingered, an unresolved tension that hung like a ghost, waiting for its moment to strike. The clock strikes midnight, its echoes ricocheting off the cracked walls of a desolate alley, where shadows linger like ghosts of unspoken fears. I can almost taste the uncertainty in the air, a metallic tang that clings to my tongue as I stand there, heart racing, breath shallow. The world feels suspended, as if time itself has slowed to a haunting crawl. I remember the way the streetlights flicker above, the soft hum of a city caught in a restless sleep. But I can't sleep, not now, not here. The weight of it all presses down on me, a suffocating blanket of dread. Across the alley stands Maeve, her dark hair tangled, a wild halo under the flickering light. Her eyes, once bright with the fervor of youth, are now pools of anxiety, reflecting a life spent dodging societal expectations like bullets. She exhales, and I see the shudder in her shoulders, the way she hugs herself tighter, as if the embrace can shield her from the storm brewing just outside this fragile sanctuary. I remember the laughter we shared, careless and intoxicating, but now the silence between us thrums with palpable tension, like the tightrope of power that separates us from the abyss. Then there's Anton, lurking in the shadows, a ghost of his former self. Once a titan of industry, now a mere whisper of ambition. He clutches a worn briefcase, the leather cracked and peeling, much like the dreams he once held dear. The weight of class sits heavily on his shoulders, an iron shackle that binds him to a past he can never escape. I see him glance at Maeve, a flicker of recognition, an understanding that transcends words. But in his gaze lies something darker, a hunger for power that has twisted him into something unrecognizable. Do you feel it? Maeve's voice trembles like the last leaf clinging to a branch in autumn. It's everywhere, in the air, the ground. It's watching us. I nod, though I can barely breathe. A shiver of fear crawls up my spine, and I can't shake the feeling that we are caught in a web, with threads of gender, class, and power entwined around our throats. The imbalance is palpable, a sour taste in the back of my throat. I remember the stories, the whispers of women silenced and men corrupted. The haunting echoes of ambitious dreams crushed underfoot by the very systems meant to uplift them. A siren wails in the distance, a banshee's cry that sends a jolt of adrenaline through me. I'm hyper-aware, every sound amplifying the chaos in my mind. I look at Anton, his face half-lit by the flickering streetlight, and I see the battle between his past and present waging war behind his eyes. You don't understand, Maeve, he begins, his voice low and gravelly, like the earth giving way beneath us. You have the privilege to dream. I've tasted power, and I know what it can do. Privilege? Maeve scoffs, yet her words are laced with bitterness. What privilege? The world sees me as a lesser being, a mere plaything in the hands of men like you. You think it's easy? That I can just waltz into the boardroom and demand respect? The shadows of this city don't care about my ambition. They crush it before it even blooms. Her anger hangs in the air, thick and suffocating. I can feel my heart racing as memories flood back, the nights spent plotting, dreaming of liberation, only to be slapped awake by reality's cruel hand. The power dynamics choke the very essence of our individuality, suffocating those who dare to rise above. Anton shifts uneasily, the lines etched on his face deepening, his voice suddenly harsh. You think you have it hard? There are walls I can't break through, borders I can't cross. Society binds us all, Maeve, but some chains are heavier than others. The truth is, we're all trapped, just in different cages. The weight of his words hangs between us like a pendulum, swinging through the echoes of unfulfilled dreams. I want to scream, to shatter this oppressive silence with a fierce cry of defiance. But I'm frozen, caught between their worlds, each a reflection of the other, yet worlds apart. I remember the dreams of equality, the whispered promises of change, and yet here we are, standing in the shadows, hoping for a light that feels impossibly distant. Suddenly, a figure looms in the distance, a silhouette outlined against the pale moonlight. My breath catches, heart thundering in my chest. Who are they? What do they want? The world shrinks, my vision narrowing to the figure approaching, each step echoing like a countdown to catastrophe. The city itself feels alive, a breathing entity wrapped in fear and uncertainty. Anton, I whisper, a tremor shaking my voice, what if they're here for us? He glances back, fear etched across his features. They won't take us without a fight, he snarls, but I can hear the tremor, the hesitation in his voice. The darkness deepens, thick as treacle, swallowing our hope whole. Maeve's eyes dart between us, a mixture of fury and fear swirling within her. No one is coming to save us. We have to fight, to carve out our space in this world, even if it means tearing down the walls ourselves. Each heartbeat resonates like a war drum, the air electric with anticipation. I remember the words of my mother, whispered in the dead of night when the world felt too big, too harsh, "You are stronger than they believe." I hold on to that, as if it were a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. The figure draws closer, and I can see the outlines of their face, an expression of determination that sends chills skittering down my spine. The night is alive with the potential for confrontation, the air thick with unspoken words and the promise of change. But as they reach us, the moment stretches, teetering on the edge of hope and despair, a fragile balance that could tip either way. The fear swells in my chest, battling with the flicker of courage ignited within me. Will we crumble under the weight of our societal fears, or will we rise, fierce and unyielding, ready to shatter the chains that bind us? In this moment, we are nothing and everything, lost yet found, fearful yet brave. The clock ticks on, relentless, as the world spins ever forward, and I close my eyes, breathing in the darkness, expecting to fight for a future that feels just out of reach. The cold, dark silence of the forest wraps around Eliza like a shroud, every heartbeat echoing against the pulse of the night. Shadows twist and writhe, whispering secrets older than the stones beneath her feet. She stands at the edge of the clearing, where the fire flickers like a heartbeat in the void, casting ghostly shapes that dance and mock the living. It will be over soon, she tells herself, though the tremor in her voice betrays her. The villagers say the witch's mark is unmistakable, but all she feels is the weight of their fear pressing down on her like a stone. Do you hear it? A voice cuts through the darkness, pulling her back. Simon, her brother, stands beside her, eyes wide as saucers. A flicker of hope dances in his gaze, but it's laced with desperation. What if we're wrong? What if it's not what they say? He grips her hand, warmth against the chill that has settled in their bones. What if it is, she whispers, images of flames licking her skin flash through her mind, the screams of the accused ringing clear as a bell. She remembers the night of the harvest festival when laughter turned to terror, when the elder fell ill and suspicion turned the air thick as fog. She remembers watching as fingers pointed, venomous whispers slicing through the crowd, and her own heart pounding so loud it drowned out reason. Folklore is full of lies, Simon. The stories are just stories. But even as she says it, doubt seeps into her words. The air thrums with tension, a palpable energy that crackles like the fire's embers. She can almost feel the weight of the villagers' judgment, their fear morphing into something grotesque, something alive that craves blood. Simon's grip tightens. Do you really believe that? After all we've seen? The question hangs in the air, heavy as a stone. They've seen too much, too many faces twisted in agony, too many nights spent wondering where the line between sanity and madness lies. He shudders, and the memory of their mother, lost to the pox, bleeds into the present. They thought she was cursed, Eliza. They thought it was witchcraft. The fire dances, revealing glimpses of the crowd surrounding it, faces pale with fear, eyes glistening like black coals. They wait for the spectacle, the reckoning, the witch to reveal herself. And she thinks of the herbalist, Melina, who once healed a fever with a simple poultice, and how her hands shook as they dragged her to the gallows. What makes a witch, Simon? Eliza's voice trembles. A spell? A potion? Or just the luck to be misunderstood? Suddenly, a cry slices through the air, a shriek that claws at her insides. The villagers have found someone, the witch, the one they've named, the one they're burning in effigy. No. Simon's voice breaks through her fog. We have to go. We can't let this happen. But Eliza is frozen, rooted in place by the weight of her own thoughts. She remembers the tales whispered around the fires as children of dark pacts and curses that twisted the world. She remembers the way the moon hung heavy in the sky those nights, as if watching, judging. She feels the very fabric of reality fraying at the edges, a world hanging on the precipice of chaos. Do you want to be next? Simon's eyes bore into hers, desperation mingling with fear. We can't save them. You know that. What if we could? The thought is a spark, a flicker of rebellion. What if we could show them that fear is a lie? But deep down, Eliza's heart quakes. The stakes are too high, the price of truth has always been blood. As the fire crackles and pops, Eliza's mind races. She thinks of all the herbs she learned to gather, of the wildflowers that could heal and hurt, of the ancient knowledge buried beneath layers of superstition. She thinks of the villagers who believe in shadows and monsters, consuming their hearts with dread. The lines blur, the night thickens, and she whispers a prayer to whatever gods still listen. Let me show them, she breathes, her voice a soft echo swallowed by the dark. Simon shakes his head, the fear in his eyes a mirror to her own. You can't. They won't listen. They'll see only what they want to see. But she can't ignore the fire in her chest, the urge to reclaim power, to turn the tide of fear into something else, something bright, something real. Eliza! A voice cuts through the fog. Evelyn, the village matriarch, steps into the clearing, fear painted across her face like a mask. You must leave. They're hunting for you. The villagers' chants grow louder, a rhythmic pulse that thunders in her ears. They believe they're right, they believe they're protecting their own. What if we could turn their fear into understanding, she muses, half to herself. Understanding. Simon scoffs, the edge of panic sharp in his voice. They'll only see a witch. But in that moment, Eliza sees not just terror, but the possibility of a truth buried beneath layers of ignorance and superstition. She steps forward, the firelight illuminating her resolve. No more will she cower in the shadows. No more will she let fear dictate her fate. Then let them see, she cries, her voice rising above the cacophony of fear and accusation. Let them see what true witchcraft is. And as the fire crackles and the villagers turn toward her, their faces twisted with rage and fear, Eliza feels the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders, the echoes of the past colliding with the present. In their eyes, she sees not just hatred, but a chance to rewrite the narrative, to weave a new story from the threads of superstition and misunderstanding. The night is thick with anticipation, a breath held in the void. Clocks tick in the distance, and the cosmos observes, indifferent to the terror unfolding below. The confrontation begins. The air crackles with raw emotion, truth clashes with fear, a storm brewing in the shadows. Eliza stands at the precipice, heart racing, as the fire dances wildly behind her, a symbol of chaos and rebirth. In that moment, everything shifts. Time suspends, breaths hold, and the world tilts. The witching hour is upon them. The flames crackled like a chorus of tortured souls as they licked the night sky, painting a canvas of agony against the ink-black backdrop of the village square. I stood frozen, heart pounding, as I watched her, an old woman with silver hair cascading like a waterfall of sorrow, being dragged forth by hands that trembled with a mix of anger and fear. The villagers, their faces twisted in a grotesque dance of shadows, threw stones, each one a heartbeat that echoed with primal rage. I remember the stench of the smoke, a pungent reminder of the lives being extinguished, the very essence of humanity reduced to cinders. In that moment, I was both an observer and a prisoner, shackled by the weight of collective madness that enveloped this corner of Europe. I caught a glimpse of Miriam, the baker's wife, her eyes wide and glistening like glass marbles, reflecting the horror of the unfolding scene. Her hands trembled, flour still dusting her apron, as she clutched a loaf of bread like a shield against the world. But who could she defend when the enemy was within? I remember thinking, fear binds us tighter than love ever could. It was not just the flames that set our hearts racing, it was the chilling whispers that slithered through the streets, weaving tales of witchcraft and betrayal like a spider spinning a deadly web. In this village, nestled among the rolling hills, fear had become a currency, traded for loyalty, for safety, for a fleeting sense of power. Secrets curled in the corners of darkened rooms, and every shadow held the potential for betrayal. I could see it in the eyes of the men, the way they shifted uncomfortably, nervous glances exchanged like a secret language of dread. But it wasn't just Europe that trembled under the weight of superstition. Across the ocean, in the dusty town of Salem, the air was thick with anticipation, as if the very atmosphere crackled with energy waiting to be unleashed. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the cries of the accused reverberating through time. Here, the stakes were just as high, the fear just as palpable, but the motivations twisted into something sinister, a reflection of the new world's own demons. I remember the sharp intake of breath as Abigail, a girl of barely 16, pointed a finger with the ferocity of a tempest. "She has come to take our souls," she screamed, her voice piercing the night like a dagger. The crowd surged forward, a tide of fury propelled by belief and ignorance. They were hungry for blood, desperate for a scapegoat, and Abigail, flawed, yet achingly human, held their fate in her trembling hands. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. Was she a hero, a villain, or merely a product of her suffocating world? And there, amidst it all, stood John, her heartbroken lover, a man torn between love and loyalty. He had seen the desperation in her eyes, the way she clung to power like a lifebuoy in a stormy sea. But as the fires raged and the accusations flew like arrows, he grappled with a truth that cut deeper than any blade. Who was he meant to protect, the woman he loved or the innocent lives caught in the crossfire? I could feel his heartbeat, a frantic rhythm echoing within my own chest, a reminder that love and fear are often two sides of the same coin. The landscape of fear stretched across both continents, each trial a reflection of its region's troubled soul. In England, witch hunts were spectacles, a theatrical performance where the villagers played their parts with zeal, wide-eyed and gasping at the horror unfolding before them. And yet, in the colonies, the trials morphed into something darker, an insatiable beast that consumed the innocent, leaving ashes in its wake. I remember the stark contrasts, how the weight of suspicion hung heavier in the air of Salem, where the ticking of the clock seemed a countdown to doom, each tick a reminder of time slipping away from those whose only crime was existing in a world gone mad. As I watched the flames dance and the shadows flicker, I felt my own heart shatter under the weight of this twisted tapestry. The old woman's cries morphed into a haunting melody, echoing through the very fabric of history. I could see the ghosts lingering in the air, specters of the damned, their eyes hollow, forever trapped in a moment where fear consumed them. And then I remembered. I remember a time when laughter echoed through the streets, when love was not bound by paranoia, when humanity was not reduced to mere words on a trial parchment. But those days felt like distant dreams, fading beneath the relentless tide of fear. In the distance, the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the charred remnants of what was once a life. The villagers began to disperse, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and dread, knowing that today's flames would be quenched but tomorrow's whispers would ignite anew. I felt the heaviness settle in my chest, a bleak ache that mirrored the despair of those who had suffered, those who had become nothing more than echoes in the night. And yet, in that moment of darkness, I also felt the flicker of hope. What if the cycle could be broken? What if fear could be turned to compassion? I held on to that thought like a lifeline, a fragile thread binding me to a future yet unwritten. As I turned to leave the square, I knew one thing with unwavering certainty: the geography of fear is a landscape we all traverse, from the cobbled streets of Europe to the dust of America. It stretches across time, across cultures, binding us in a shared experience of humanity. And as I looked towards the horizon, I felt a visceral pull, a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, dawn is always waiting to break. The darkness enveloped the village like an unseen predator, a chilling blanket woven from whispered fears and the scent of damp earth. It wrapped tightly around a figure, Mary, her heart pounding like a war drum as she stumbled through the narrow streets of Pendle on that fateful night. The weight of uncertainty pulled at her throat, a noose of dread tightening with every step. She remembered the faces of those who vanished, their shadows flickering just beyond the edge of her mind. They were taken. I remember, she muttered, clutching her shawl against the biting wind, the night the moon turned red. The agony of that memory surged through her, an electric pulse that ignited the terror living in her bones. She glanced at the silhouettes of the houses, their windows dark like the eyes of the dead, and she thought of her mother, her heart, a delicate glass ornament, shattered by the weight of accusation. In another time, another place, the whispers would have been mere gossip. But here, in this cursed patch of earth, they were the seeds of destruction. Each accusation was a sharpened dagger, each name spoken a funeral dirge, and Mary was terrified it would soon be her turn. The townsfolk were hungry for a scapegoat, ravenous for blood, and she could feel their eyes boring into her back, heavy with suspicion. Across the ocean, in Salem, the air was thick with the same malignant energy. Samuel, a young man with despair etched on his face, stood at the gallows, a silent witness to the tragedy unfolding before him. The scaffold loomed like a grotesque monument to human folly, and he could hear the cries of the innocent, echoing in his mind. "I remember," he whispered, his voice barely a breath, "the day they accused my sister." The memory clawed at him, a feral beast desperate to escape its cage. His sister, Elizabeth, had laughed too loud, worn a dress too vibrant, danced too freely. Those were her sins, and they were all it took to invite the wrath of the town. Samuel had seen the fire in their eyes, the way they turned her life into a theater of horrors, watching with glee as the flames of judgment consumed her spirit. The gallows stood ready, a monstrous grin waiting to swallow another innocent soul. Would they come for him next? The thought squeezed his heart, and with it came the bitter taste of helplessness. The moon hung high, a ghostly witness to the terror that gripped both Pendle and Salem, as if the cosmos itself were holding its breath. In the distance, the sound of a bell tolled, muffled by an unseen fog, marking time in a world spiraling toward darkness. Mary and Samuel were bound by invisible threads, their fates entwined in the shadows of suspicion and fear that wrapped around them like the cold grip of death. Why do they fear us? Mary wondered aloud, her voice trembling, a fragile song caught in the wind. What have we done but exist? Each question echoed in the silence, unanswered, a void that gnawed at her sanity. It was madness, this dance of accusation, this spectacle of betrayal. She thought of her neighbors, once friends, now her persecutors, their faces twisted by paranoia, and she felt the weight of their collective anguish. In Salem, Samuel's heart raced as he watched the spectacle unfold. "I remember the taste of laughter," he mourned, his thoughts drifting to the days before the trials, when joy flowed like a river. Now it dried up, replaced by a cruel tide of suspicion that swept away reason, leaving only fear in its wake. Is this justice? Or is it the death of reason? He searched the crowd for familiar faces, only to be met with the cold stares of strangers. Each one was a potential witness, a harbinger of doom. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mary felt the chill seep deeper into her bones. A figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked and hooded, moving like a spectre through the fog. Her heart raced, each beat a warning, a primal echo of danger. "Who are you?" she called out, voice tinged with both fear and defiance. The figure paused, and for a moment, shadows danced across the face of the hooded stranger. "Do you not know?" came the soft, haunting answer. "I am the whisper in the night, the voice that tells the truth when no one else dares." And in that moment, the world shifted on its axis. A shudder of hope sparked within Mary, but it quickly faded, replaced by the reality that truth had become a luxury. "What truth?" she demanded, desperation clawing at her throat. The figure stepped closer, the moonlight revealing the glint of steel hidden beneath the cloak, a knife, sharp and glimmering like the lies that had led them to this moment. "I can help you," the stranger whispered, breath ghostly, "but it will cost you everything." Samuel, standing alone in Salem, felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He stood rigid as fingers of terror curled around his stomach. "I will not betray her," he vowed silently, yet doubt nagged like a persistent itch. He thought of the news, of the crowd that gathered to watch the spectacle unfold. How could they turn against their own? How could they condemn the innocent? He took a step forward, heart racing, the urge to scream echoing in his chest. This madness must end. But the words caught in his throat, stifled by fear and resignation. Both Mary and Samuel stood at the precipice of despair, teetering on the brink of a chasm filled with uncertainty, the night pregnant with anticipation. The clock chimed, each tick a heartbeat, a reminder that time was not their ally. "I remember," Mary began, but the words slipped from her grasp, lost to the night. The faces of the damned swirled around her, a tempest of lost souls whispering secrets of the past, of their truths buried beneath the weight of fear. And as the moon hung heavy above, casting a pallor over the earth, the spectres of Salem and Pendle drew closer, their stories inexorably entwined in a web of despair. All that remained was the echo of their cries, a haunting symphony amidst the shadows, a reminder that the trials were far from over. In the silence that followed, the ghosts of the past continued to weave their chilling tale, binding them all together in an endless loop of anguish and accusation, fear and fury. The clock tower struck midnight. An eerie silence blanketed the town, as if the very air held its breath, waiting. The moon hung high, casting silver shadows that danced like phantoms across cobblestone streets. A scream pierced the stillness, shattering it into 1,000 shards. Clara stood frozen, heart racing, breath hitching in her throat, as the villagers' whispers slithered around her like serpents. Accusations, like dark clouds, loomed overhead, threatening to unleash a storm. I remember, she thought, the way we used to laugh, before the shadows crept in. Her best friend, Annabelle, stood nearby, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. Once bright and lively, Annabelle had become a shell, a ghost haunting the edges of sanity. The fear clung to her, a fog suffocating any flicker of hope. "Clara, they're saying it's you." Annabelle's voice trembled, the weight of the accusation pressing down like a leaden blanket. Clara's heart sank. What? Why? But deep down, she knew. The whispers, the glances, the fingers pointing, all converged like a storm ready to unleash chaos. They were hungry for a scapegoat, desperate to feed their paranoia. It didn't matter that Clara was innocent, the tide of mass hysteria surged, and she was caught in the undertow. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, John, the town crier, his face pale, eyes darting. He held a lantern that flickered like the last breath of a dying flame. "The council demands answers," he shouted, voice cracking, echoing through the empty streets. "Who among us is the witch? Who among us brings this darkness?" "Not me," Clara cried, but her voice felt small and fragile against the enormity of their fear. She felt the weight of their gazes, each one a dagger, piercing deeper into her soul. What once was a village of camaraderie had morphed into a den of suspicion, where every heart beat with distrust, every whispered word twisted the knife deeper. I remember, she thought, the memories flooding in, days spent under sunlight, laughter spilling like warm honey, easy friendships. Now, shadows lurked in every corner, hearts hardened by a paranoia that gripped them all. It was a psychological wildfire, consuming reason, leaving only ash and despair. Annabelle clutched Clara's arm, her grip tightening like a vice. "What if they take you?" Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, a vulnerability that broke Clara's heart. "What if they believe the lies?" The air crackled with tension, each heartbeat a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. The townsfolk gathered, a sea of faces twisted in fear and anger, their fervor a sickening echo of the darkest parts of humanity. A few whispered of demons, a few of curses, their words weaving a trap, ensnaring Clara in a web of their making. "They'll accuse anyone. They need someone to blame," Clara whispered, a stark realization dawning. "They need to believe it's not them, their faults, their fears. They need a witch." The realization hit her like a cold wave. She was simply a reflection of their deepest anxieties, their buried sins rising to the surface. They were not just accusing her, they were projecting their own darkness, their own fragility. With every accusation, they drew closer to the edge of madness, fueled by a collective hysteria that bubbled beneath the surface, waiting to boil over. A voice rang out, sharp and accusing, "Mrs. Patterson," the baker, her face flushed with indignation. "It's her! I saw her in the woods, dancing with the shadows." The crowd roared, their anger palpable, a living organism growing, feeding off the chaos, the fear. Clara's chest tightened, desperation clawing at her throat. "No," she shouted, but the words fell flat, swallowed by the mounting hysteria. She glanced at Annabelle, whose face had turned to stone, the spark of hope extinguished by the weight of collective fear. Clara's heart broke for her friend, who stood on the precipice of despair, the fragile line between sanity and madness wavering like a candle flame in the wind. I remember, Clara thought, the memories cascading like a waterfall, Annabelle laughing, their dreams entwined like vines. We promised to be each other's light. But now, the darkness threatened to consume them both, and Clara felt the pull of despair, the urge to give in, to let the shadows take over. "Clara, you must run." Annabelle's voice was urgent, a plea laced with desperation. "You won't survive this." But where could she run? The shadows had seeped into every corner of her world, curling around her like vines, tightening their grip. The truth became twisted, innocence became guilt in this theater of the absurd, where reason had no place amidst the cacophony of fear. As the crowd surged forward, Clara's breath quickened, the suffocating dread tightening like a noose around her neck. The faces blurred into a grotesque collage of terror and rage. Each shout echoed in her head, a relentless drumbeat urging her toward the edge. "Clara!" Annabelle's cry was a lifeline, but the churning sea of bodies pulled her under. The night thickened, shadows deepening, swallowing her whole. In a moment of clarity, Clara realized she was not merely a victim, she was a mirror reflecting their darkest fears, their deepest insecurities. And there, in that moment of realization, the world around her faded to a whisper. She saw not just the faces of the accusers, but their fears, laid bare under the moonlight, ghosts of their own making. For every accusation hurled at her was a confession of their own guilt, a desperate attempt to escape the haunting specters of their truths. The town, once a place of laughter and light, had transformed into a crucible, forging a hell of their own creation. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the heat of their rage wash over her, and wondered if there was any escape from the madness that had gripped them all. And within that whirlwind of chaos, as the mass hysteria swelled, she understood that this was not just her fight, it was a struggle for the very soul of humanity itself, a haunting tale of fear, vulnerability, and the desperate need for connection in a world where shadows dance too close for comfort. Yet still, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope remained, a glimmer of light fighting against the encroaching darkness. Perhaps, in the depths of this nightmare, they could find a way back to each other, to the laughter that once bound them. Perhaps they could confront the shadows instead of surrendering to them. And with that thought, Clara steeled herself against the tide, prepared to face the confrontation that loomed ahead, knowing that the battle raged not just outside her, but within the hearts of everyone gathered. In this dance of hysteria, the line between victim and perpetrator blurred, and it was in this very turmoil that the true horror of their humanity lay. The air crackles with tension, a thick fog of fear rolling over the gathered masses. I stand at the edge of the village square, my heart racing in sync with the pounding of the drums echoing in the distance. They call it a trial, but I know better. This is a spectacle, a gruesome theater where the innocent are puppets dangling on strings of suspicion, pulled by the fingers of fear. The flickering torches cast long shadows, twisting the features of the spectators into grotesque masks of dread and excitement. I remember the way she looked, the accused, the woman with wild hair like a tempest, dark eyes burning with defiance. Isolde. They say she spoke to the Dark One, that she walked in the woods at midnight, whispering to the trees, but I remember her laugh, warm and rich as an autumn harvest. I remember the way she cared for the sick, how she mixed herbs with skillful hands and a knowing smile. But that was before the whispers turned to shouts, before the townsfolk turned their backs and gazed upon her like she was a viper ready to strike. Beside me stands Thomas, his face pale as a ghost, yet his eyes are aflame with indignation. We never thought it could come to this. We grew up together, shared secrets in the shadows of our childhood, but now he feels betrayal like a knife lodged in his gut. It's not true, he mutters, shaking his head. None of it. How can they say these things? I want to tell him it doesn't matter, truth is a currency spent lavishly in this town, and the cost of innocence is a burning pyre, a clamor of roars from the crowd that demands blood. Witnesses step forward, trembling with the weight of their lies. Old Mrs. Holloway, her back bent like the gnarled branches of the willow, points a crooked finger, quivering with righteous rage. I saw her, she gasps, her voice shrill, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. In the night, she danced with the devil. The word devil hangs in the air, a sinister echo that gathers weight with every heartbeat. Each accusation is a stone, hurled with deadly precision, each testimony a noose tightening around Isolde's neck. I can feel the energy shifting, a palpable dread that wraps around us like a tightening coil. The spectators lean in, hungry for blood, their eyes glimmering with a mix of fear and glee, as if they're about to witness a grand performance. Thomas, say something. I urge him, But he remains frozen, as if trapped in the icy grip of his own terror. What if the devil is real? He whispers, the question more an admission of fear than a statement of belief. I want to scream, to shake him out of this stupor, but the words catch in my throat. I remember my own fear, the way panic clutched at my heart like a cold hand. How could I blame him? The next witness is a young girl, barely old enough to understand the weight of her words. She cursed my cow, the child whimpers, eyes wide, clutching a tattered doll to her chest. It died. She made it die. The crowd gasps, the drama unfolding like a macabre play. Isolde stands silent, her composure a fragile shield. I can see the shadows of doubt flickering in the eyes of the townsfolk, the seeds of fear taking root in their hearts. I remember the echoes of laughter that once filled this square, the carefree days of summer before the chill of accusation swept over us. Now, it feels like all joy has been sucked from the air, replaced only by a grim anticipation of what's to come. The gavel strikes, a deafening sound that snaps the spectators to attention, as if they've just awoken from a shared nightmare. Guilty. The word hangs thick in the air, a palpable moment of collective horror and exhilaration. I watch Isolde's face as the verdict lands like a blow. Yet somehow, her eyes, those fierce, dark eyes, burn with an intensity that ignites something deep within me. I feel a flicker of hope amidst the despair. Maybe she will fight. Maybe she will resist. But then, in a moment that pierces my very soul, Thomas steps forward, his face contorted with conflict. I know her. I know Isolde. She isn't a witch. The crowd turns, a wave of anger crashing over him, drowning his voice. She cured my mother. She saved us. In that instant, I see the boy he used to be, the one who dared to dream beyond the confines of this town, who believed in the good of people. But memories are fragile, and the crowd has become a living entity, morphing, boiling over with rage and fear. The screams of witch drown out his plea. The night deepens, shadows stretching longer, swirling like smoke around us. I feel the weight of their gazes, the furious accusations binding me to the earth. My heart races, pounding against my ribs like a caged beast. Thomas! I shout, but my voice is lost in the chaos. I remember the stories of those who came before, tales of betrayal and fear, of innocent souls condemned by whispers and half-truths. The air is thick with the stench of sweat and desperation, a cocktail of hysteria that seeps into our bones. Each witness a ghost, each testimony a curse that echoes into the void. And then, the final blow, a voice rising from the crowd, a man with a twisted grin. Burn her? Let the flames cleanse our souls. Cheers erupt, and the ground trembles as if the earth itself is bearing witness to this wicked dance of humanity. I stand frozen, a witness to a tragedy that unfolds under the cloak of night. The world spins, and I feel as if I'm trapped in a dream, one that twists and turns, revealing the darkest corners of human nature. I remember how quickly fear can turn friends into foes, how a single spark can ignite a wildfire that consumes everything in its path. And I realize then, with a shuddering dread, that this is just the beginning. The trial may end, but the echoes of these testimonies will linger, haunting us all. As flames flicker in the distance, casting a hellish glow on our faces, I know we are all bound together by this moment, entwined in a fate that we can neither escape nor deny. It is inescapable, the weight of every heart, every soul, every lie. The air grows thick with smoke and sorrow, and I feel it settle deep within me. There is no turning back. This is not just a trial. This is an awakening, a reckoning that will reverberate through the ages, and no one will emerge unscathed. We are all witnesses to the haunting tragedy of our own making. And it is only the beginning. The air was thick, heavy as the iron chains that clanked against damp stone walls. A single flickering candle illuminated the room, casting shadows that danced like phantoms on the jagged surfaces around them. In the corner, a figure hunched over, knees drawn tight to a chest that heaved in shallow, frantic breaths. His name was Elias, and he had only known fear in fleeting moments before tonight. Now, it clawed at him, a beast with gnashing teeth, gnawing on his insides, whispering despair into his ear. Just tell them what they want to hear, a voice hissed from the darkness, a voice he recognized, yet could hardly believe. Marta, his sister, her face a mask of bruises and tears, stood before him. Her spirit flickered like the dying flame between them, the love once fierce now reduced to a fragile filament. "They'll stop if you do." Elias raised his head, desperation etched into every line of his expression. "They're lying. They want me to confess to something I didn't do." "Mart," he choked on her name, a strangled cry. "I would never betray you." Yet even as he spoke, a grim truth loomed on the edges of his mind like a storm on the horizon. The air shifted, heavy with the scent of sweat and fear, and memories flooded in, moments spent laughing in the sun, days of warmth that now felt like a distant universe. They had once chased dreams together, but now those dreams lay shattered like glass at their feet, sharp and dangerous. "Elias," she knelt beside him, the ground beneath her knees stained with the ghosts of others. "You must understand. They have ways that make you wish for death. Just say it. Say the words." Her voice trembled, and he could see in her eyes the flicker of a memory, candlelight and whispered secrets shared between siblings, dreams woven from laughter. But now, the walls closed in, and the shadows grew oppressive. The door creaked open, revealing a silhouette, a tall figure, a warden draped in authority, his presence suffocating. He stepped forward, the light casting a harsh glare on his features, his smile a cold blade. "Time to make a choice, Elias," he said, voice smooth as silk, yet laced with venom. "Confess, or we can find other ways to persuade you." Elias's pulse quickened, the drumming of his heart a frantic chorus drowning out the world. He remembered the stories, the ones that echoed through the streets at night, tales of screams that slipped through cracks in the earth, of souls trapped in torment, their confessions ripped from them like flesh. His body ached with the anticipation of pain, a memory of something that hadn't yet come but loomed large, a shadow unfurling its wings. "Leave her out of this," he shouted, voice raw. "You'll not take her too." But the warden only laughed, a sound that curdled the air. "Ah, but you see, Elias, the game has already begun. Your silence is a luxury you can no longer afford." He waved a hand, and figures emerged from the darkness, torturers whose eyes gleamed with a hunger for confessions, for secrets to spill like crimson rivers. Marta recoiled, a painful wince crossing her face, and in that moment, Elias felt something inside him shift. It was a dark, cold resolve, churning like a tempest. He could not let them take her. "Take me, then," he yelled, voice rising to a fever pitch, desperation mingling with defiance. "I'll say whatever you want, just leave her alone." The warden's smile widened, a predator savoring its prey. "Now we're getting somewhere." He turned, gesturing towards the door. "Your sister will wait outside. We'll have a little chat, just you and I." As they marched down the corridor, the echoes of their footsteps mingled with the distant cries of souls ensnared. Every step felt like sinking deeper into a mire of despair, and yet Elias clung to the hope that perhaps, in the darkest night, a flicker of light could still exist. They entered a cold chamber, the air prickling against Elias's skin. The walls were lined with instruments of pain, gleaming ominously under the flickering lights. He swallowed hard, eyes darting to the shadows that whispered promises of agony. "Sit," the warden commanded, gesturing to a chair that looked more like a throne of torment. Elias obeyed, mind racing. He envisioned Marta, her face a pale crescent against the encroaching dark, and a fierce protective instinct surged within him. "I'll not betray my own," he whispered to himself, the words a talisman against the impending storm. The warden leaned in closer, the stench of power wafting off him like rot. "You have a choice, Elias. You can confess to her crimes, take on her accusations, and we'll let you both go. Or," he let the word hang like a dagger in the air. A shiver traced Elias's spine as he considered the weight of betrayal. The warden's smile lingered, cruel and steady. "Just think of the pain we can avoid. The truth is so much easier to bear if you let it be your own." He clenched his fists, feeling the nails dig into his palms, grounding him against the encroaching tide of despair. "I remember," he whispered, memories flooding back, Marta's laughter, the love they shared, the warmth of family that stood against the chill of the night. "No," he shouted, the word reverberating against the walls, a defiant roar against the impending doom. "I will not let you twist my soul into a weapon against her." The warden stepped back, eyes narrowing. "So be it. We'll see how long the defiance lasts." With a swift motion, he signaled to the others, and the room erupted into chaos, a cacophony of sound and fury. Elias closed his eyes, heart pounding, ready to face whatever darkness awaited him. His resolve burned bright, a flicker of rebellion amidst the shadows, as he steeled himself against the onslaught of pain that was coming, a pain he would endure for the one person who mattered most. And as the door slammed shut behind him, plunging him into a world of terror, the last remnants of hope tethered him to the memory of Marta's face, a promise that in the face of darkness, love could still shine, even if only for a fleeting moment. The clock ticked, time slipping away, but he would hold on. He would fight, because deep in the heart of despair, there lay a whisper that spoke of strength, of enduring love, of a bond that even the darkest night could not shatter. It begins in the square, where the air is thick with dread, the kind that slithers into your lungs, squeezing and choking. I stand there, feet rooted in the dirt, heart thrumming like a war drum, as the crowd gathers. Faces blur into a grotesque tapestry of fear and anticipation, eyes wide and glistening, full of unspoken horrors. The scent of sweat and fear twists with the crisp autumn air, a stark reminder that the chill is not just from the season. Alice, my sister, stands at the edge, her hands trembling, the linen of her dress whispering against her skin. She's always been the brave one, the fiery spirit who danced in the moonlight, spinning tales of stars and magic. But now, her laughter hangs heavy with dread, a ghost of what once was. I can see it in her eyes, the flickering light dimming, threatened by shadows that loom larger than life. She's been accused, and the very air around us grows thick with the weight of her impending doom. "Do you think they'll burn me?" she whispers, her voice a fragile thread pulling at my heart. I want to lie, to tell her that it's just a rumor, that the town wouldn't be so cruel, but deep down, I feel the truth curling around my spine, cold and unyielding. "Stay close to me," I say, but the words are hollow, echoing against the looming gallows, where wood creaks ominously in the breeze. The crowd swells, a living organism, thrumming with the pulse of fear, excitement, the intoxicating allure of a spectacle. They crave blood, they crave redemption, a twisted salvation in the flames. Across the square, Thomas watches, his shoulders tense, hands balled into fists at his sides. He's the town's blacksmith, strong and steadfast, yet the weight of expectation crushes him. His father was a man of iron, a man who forged strength from the fire, but now Thomas feels like ash, scattered in the wind. He loved Alice, but love means little in a world where whispers can ignite a pyre. I catch his eye, a fleeting moment that sends fire racing through my veins. What is it that binds us here? Is it duty? Is it love? Or is it the unforgiving grip of a community that has turned us into monsters? He shakes his head, and I know he longs to save her, to pull her from this nightmare, but how can he? The fear has woven its tendrils deep, choking the very roots of our friendship. "Look away," someone shouts, a voice breaking the silence, startling birds into flight. "Look away, or you'll be damned." But the crowd leans forward, hungry for the show, for the spectacle of justice, or perhaps vengeance. I feel the tension thrum through the air, each heartbeat a countdown, each breath a prayer for mercy that will never come. In the flickering shadows of that grim day, I remember the stories of our childhood, a world where witches were just tales, nothing more than bedtime spookiness. How could the laughter of our youth have morphed into these cries for blood? The stories once painted magical wonders, now twisted into nightmares. We should be dreaming of the cosmos, of stars swirling in an endless dance, not standing here, waiting for the sparks that will consume a life. The clock tower tolls, its echo haunting, a reminder of the time slipping away. Alice's fate hangs suspended, a pendulum swaying in the wind. I feel the weight of history pressing down, like the breath of every soul that has faced the same fate, the forgotten, the condemned. I want to scream, to shatter the silence of this macabre theater, to claw my way through the churning mass of bodies, but my feet are glued, my heart a lead weight. And then, the moment erupts. A figure, cloaked in dark robes, steps forward, the crowd parts like the sea before a tempest. You stand accused of witchcraft, the voice booms, deep and resonant, wrapping around us like a noose. You consort with demons, you corrupt the innocent. Each word strikes like a hammer, echoing against the stone and wood of the square, each syllable a nail driven deeper into Alice's coffin. Liar! Thomas yells, rage igniting within him, his fists trembling with a power that begs to be unleashed. She's done no such thing. But the crowd rumbles, a tide turning, the weight of suspicion crashing down, dragging him under. I see the flicker of doubt in their eyes, how easily they turn on her, how quickly their love can morph into hatred. Don't! I cry, but the sound is lost in the cacophony, swallowed by the hunger for justice that spirals wildly out of control. I am drowning in the sound of accusations, the rhythm of hatred pounding like a drum, a sinister beat that calls forth violence and despair. In that moment, I remember the echoes of laughter from our childhood, the warmth of summer days and the innocence that felt unbreakable. How fragile it all seems now, like a spider's web shimmering in morning dew, so easily torn apart. I fight against the tide, but the fear has transformed into something monstrous, a beast that consumes reason, that gnaws on the very marrow of humanity. Alice's eyes meet mine, filled with terror and something else, resolve? Perhaps a flicker of defiance. I will not burn, she seems to say silently, a warrior in a world turned dark. But the flames are hungry, ravenous for the sacrifice, for the blood that will feed their insatiable appetite. The embers of our shared past flicker and dim, and I can almost hear the whisper of the cosmos, the stars blinking furiously, warning us of the chaos we have unleashed. I grasp the threads of memory, the laughter that once filled our days, and it feels like grasping at smoke. We are caught in a storm, a tempest of fear that threatens to pull us all under, and in the heart of this public spectacle, I realize, we are all woven into this tapestry of tragedy. As the gallows creak under the weight of history, as the shadows stretch and deepen, the cycle of witch hunts is born anew. A thread of life, fraying at the edges, echoing a chilling refrain. We live, we love, we fear, and the flames dance, always hungry, always waiting. In the heart of the crowd, I stand lost, drowning in the swirling chaos of community and culture, caught between the love I feel for my sister and the terror of a world gone mad. No one can truly escape the flames that consume both the innocent and the guilty alike. The clock ticks on, and I know, this is just the beginning. The air crackled with an irrepressible tension, as if the sky itself held its breath, waiting, watching. I stood at the edge of the town square, where the gallows still loomed like a bitter memory, its wooden frame warped and splintered from the heavy burdens it had carried. A shudder coursed through me, not from the chill of the approaching dusk, but from the ghost of fear lingering in the hearts of the townsfolk. They shuffled about, eyes darting, lips murmuring, as if every shadow held a secret too dangerous to whisper aloud. I remember the day she stood there, trembling yet defiant, a spark of fire swirling in her eyes, bright against the encroaching darkness. Eleanor had always been different, wild and unapologetic, like a spring storm that swept through dry fields, leaving them drenched in chaos. But now, in the aftermath of the trial, she was but a fragment of her former self, the weight of accusation pressing down like 1,000 stones, stifling the very breath from her lungs. "Can you feel it?" she whispered one night, the moon a silver crescent above us, casting flickering shadows on her haunted face. "The fear that seeps into our bones, our very marrow? They think the woods are filled with witches, with me. But it's just the darkness within them. I'm not the one who should be afraid." I wanted to reach out, to pull her back from the edge where she stood, a tightrope walker in a world gone mad. I wanted to tell her that life after the trial wasn't just about surviving, it was about living. But the words tangled in my throat, choked by the echoes of what we had witnessed. Across the square, Samuel watched, his face a mask of anguish and fury. He had loved Eleanor fiercely, but now he was caught in a storm of his own making. My heart ached for him, for the way his hands clenched into fists that trembled with unspent rage. They called her a witch, he spat, venom in his voice, as if their own sins could be cleansed by burning her at the stake. But they don't see, she was the light in this place, and now his voice broke, the sorrow spilling over like a dam bursting, heavy and relentless. I wanted to comfort him, to say that he was right, that Eleanor had been our beacon in dark times, but the truth was more chilling than any accusation. We were all complicit, woven into this fabric of fear and paranoia, a tapestry stained by falsehoods that had crept into our lives like an insidious disease. Eleanor stood at the edge of the forest, her silhouette outlined against the dying light, a lone figure amidst the whispers. "They think they've silenced me," she said, her voice a soft tremor, "but all they've done is awaken the shadows. I can hear them." "Can you?" "The whispers of the lost ones. They're not gone, they're angry, and they're waiting." The woods, dark and twisted, seemed to lean closer, listening, their breath a rustling of leaves, a mocking echo of our fears. I could see the flicker of something in Eleanor's eyes, a spark that could ignite a firestorm. "You don't understand," I murmured, fear clawing at my throat. "You can't play with those forces. They'll consume you." And yet, she smiled, a wild, reckless grin that held no fear, only an intoxicating exhilaration. Better to be consumed than to live as a ghost among the living. Better to burn brightly than to fade into shadows. Samuel's voice split the air again, raw and desperate. "You're not a witch, Eleanor. You're more than that. You're not a monster, but you'll become one if you chase these shadows." But even as he spoke, I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, a crack in his resolve. He was terrified of losing her, but in that same breath, terrified of what she might become. The town had turned into a theater of madness, where every glance was a dagger, every word a noose. I remember the faces of my neighbors, once familiar, now twisted with suspicion. I watched as they gathered in clusters, speaking in hushed tones, fingers pointed not at the accused, but at each other. The air thickened with unspoken accusations, a malignant fog that wrapped around us, suffocating and relentless. "Do you hear it?" Eleanor pressed, stepping closer to the edge of the woods, her voice a haunting melody. "The whispers of the past, calling to us. They want their stories told, their truths freed from the shackles of fear. We could be more than this. We could stop." Samuel's voice thundered, echoing through the growing darkness, surprising even him with its intensity. "You're not just a voice in the night. You're a living person, Eleanor. And you have to come back. This isn't some fairy tale where you dance with shadows and walk away unscathed." But it was too late. The darkness had seeped into her veins, the thrill of rebellion glimmering in her eyes. "You think I'm the one who'll be consumed? Look around you, Samuel. The real monsters were the faces of our friends and family. They're the ones who turned on me, on us." Wind howled through the trees, an eerie lament that echoed our despair. I watched as Eleanor stepped back from the line that divided the familiar world from the dark unknown, the divide trembling under her feet. I wanted to scream, to pull her back, but words caught in my throat, choked by the weight of what had been lost. Like clockwork, the town's heart beat erratically, each pulse echoing despair, fear, and an insatiable hunger for blood. I remembered the faces of those who had been taken, their names now etched into the very fabric of our nightmares. "You don't have to do this," I whispered, falling to my knees, the cold ground biting into my skin. "We can face this together. We can heal." But Eleanor's laughter rang out, a wild, haunting sound that turned the air colder. "Heal? There's no healing in a town that feasts on fear. No, my dear friend, there is only rebirth in fire. The shadows are waiting, and I will not be a ghost in this world anymore." And just like that, I realized, the real horror was not in the shadows that threatened to consume Eleanor, but in the dark recesses of our own souls, where fear and doubt danced hand in hand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the town square fell into a sinister silence, the air heavy with the promise of chaos, and the shadows grew longer, reaching out, urging us to step into the unknown. We stood on the precipice, two hearts beating wildly, one longing for the light and the other dancing with the darkness. And in that moment, I could only watch as Eleanor teetered on the edge, the abyss whispering her name, as Samuel fought desperately to pull her back, his heart breaking like fragile glass. The world held its breath, and we were caught in a moment that would unravel us all. The air crackles with tension, 1,000 whispers swirling through the night like restless spirits. The moon, a slivered knife, slices through the dense fog that clings to the village, its pale light spilling onto cobbled streets where shadows stretch and twist. In the heart of this labyrinth of fear, a figure stands trembling, her breath quickening, the weight of accusation heavy as iron shackles around her neck. "I remember," she murmurs, the words falling like stones into a pond, rippling through the silence. "I remember the laughter, the way it danced through the air, bright and careless, just before it turned to screams." Marjorie, once a beloved healer, now a pariah, grips her hands, fingers digging into her palms. The village she nurtured now turns its back, eyes hard as flint. It was a simple remedy, a concoction of herbs, a little something for a child's fever that spiraled into chaos. "Witch," they had shrieked, as if the word itself could summon the darkness, a curse thrown like a dagger. Marjorie's heart races, each beat a drum echoing betrayal. And yet, across the village square, a different scene unfolds, a stark contrast to Marjorie's anguish. There stands Isolde, her face illuminated by the flickering light of a torch, the gleam of malice dancing in her eyes. Once friends, now rivals, the air between them thick with the scent of danger. Isolde's laughter rings out, sharp and cruel, slicing through the quiet. She knows the weight of her words, she wields them like a sword, each accusation a calculated strike, each glance a weapon. The villagers lean closer, eyes wide and hungry, desperate for the thrill of the hunt. "I remember," Isolde echoes, but her memories are painted in shades of envy. "I remember her healing touch, the way they flocked to her like moths to a flame. And how they turned their backs on me." She feels the pulse of the crowd, the electric energy of fear and excitement coursing through them. She has become the puppeteer, pulling strings, orchestrating the chaos. Each accusation she hurls is not merely an act of vengeance, it is a dance. A macabre ballet where the lines between victim and perpetrator blur like smoke in the night. "But I am not like you, Marjorie," Isolde whispers to herself, the words a secret promise. "I will not be silenced." Her breath quickens, the thrill of power igniting something dark within her. Each person who steps forward, eyes alight with righteous fury, only fuels her ambition. The scent of burning wood and fear mingles, intoxicating, as she revels in her own twisted sorcery. A child's cry pierces the night, wrenching Marjorie from her spiral of despair. "Help me!" It's a call that pierces through the fog, echoing like a ghost. She remembers the warmth of a small hand in hers, the delicate pulse of trust. She makes a choice then, a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. She will not let this darkness consume her. Though her heart is shackled, she feels the flicker of hope. But a figure looms behind her, cloaked in shadows. It's the village priest, his presence a suffocating weight, a spectre of judgment. "You consort with the devil," he hisses, spitting words like venom. "Your kind brings pestilence and death." His voice is a whip, cracking through the night, and Marjorie flinches as if struck. "Isolde," she whispers, a plea laced with desperation. "You don't have to do this." But Isolde stands firm, her heart pounding with the thrill of the hunt. "You've taken everything from me. Now it's your turn to suffer." The crowd surges, a wave of righteous fury, and Marjorie feels the weight of their stares like chains wrapped around her limbs. "I remember the nights we shared secrets," Marjorie pleads, her voice trembling. "The way we dreamed of a better world." But dreams are ephemeral, and in the wake of accusation, they shatter like glass. Isolde's eyes reflect a newfound power, her hands trembling not with fear but with exhilaration. In that moment, she feels untouchable, a queen in a kingdom of ash and bone. And Marjorie, her heart beating furiously in her chest, becomes the sacrificial lamb, the one to absolve Isolde of her own fears and failures. The mob closes in, a tempest of humanity fueled by fear and hatred, casting aside their humanity as they chant, "Burn the witch." Each word is a knife, carving deeper into Marjorie's soul. She gasps, a desperate sound that escapes her lips. How quickly love can turn to hatred, how swiftly hope can be extinguished. "I remember," Marjorie murmurs, her voice a haunting echo against the howling wind. "I remember what it was like to be free." And as the flames begin to lick at the wooden pyre, a flicker of defiance ignites within her. She lifts her chin, meeting Isolde's gaze, eyes blazing with fury and understanding. Somewhere deep inside, they both know the truth, they are two sides of the same coin, spun by fate's cruel hand, both victims and perpetrators in this twisted play of witchcraft and accusation. The fire crackles, the air thick with smoke and despair. It draws them closer, binding them in a dark embrace. As Marjorie's world begins to fade, the last thing she sees is Isolde's face, frozen in a moment of triumph, yet marred by the shadow of something deeper, the haunting realization that the flames do not just consume, they transform. They do not just destroy, they reveal. And so, in the flickering shadows, two women stand, one a victim, the other a predator. In their eyes burns the eternal question, who truly is the witch? The air is electric, shivering with accusations and fear, as shadows dance across the cobblestone streets of a town gripped by terror. A woman stands at the gallows, her hands bound, a flickering torch illuminating the defiance in her eyes. She knows the weight of history presses down upon her like a vice. A crowd gathers, a sea of faces twisted with rage and confusion, the scent of smoke and betrayal heavy in the night. Witch, they chant, the word a knife that slices through the fabric of truth, binding the innocent to darkness. I remember a time when the world felt lighter, the laughter of children echoing in the warm sun. But the sun has set on reason, eclipsed by a fever that grips the hearts of men and women alike. I stand in the midst of the crowd, heart racing, pulse quickening, caught in a storm of emotion. Fear and excitement intertwine like lovers dancing on the edge of oblivion. Why do I feel this pull? Why do I watch, unable to tear my gaze away from the spectacle unfolding before me? Then there's Martha, a mother, her heart torn between her love for her daughter and the whispers that poison her mind. She watches from the shadows, a silent witness, battling her own demons. What if it's true, she thinks, the question gnawing at her insides. The weight of her choices presses down, suffocating. The townsfolk, like wolves, circle hungrily, their eyes glinting with a savage hunger for vindication. It could be her, they murmur. It could be any of us. I see her fingers twitch at her side, a desperate prayer or a plea for mercy, but the crowd is relentless. In this moment, the line between justice and vengeance blurs. And then there's Thomas, a once respected judge, now a figure cloaked in uncertainty. His jaw clenches as he stands at the precipice of moral decay. He knows the law, but what is law when the heart is ruled by fear? He remembers the days when justice was blind, before the spectre of witchcraft clouded judgment. Is this what I fought for? He wonders, a flicker of doubt igniting a blaze of despair. The weight of his gavel feels like the weight of the world, each thud echoing the finality of life and death, each decision a drowning in the depths of his soul. Witch! The cry reverberates, a chant echoing through the night. The crowd swells, a tidal wave of emotion, a collective heartbeat that thrums with a chilling intensity. And as they draw closer to the gallows, I feel the pull of history wrapping around my throat, squeezing tighter with every shout. I remember when we were free, a voice cracks from the back, a whisper lost in the chaos. But freedom is a distant memory, a ghost haunting the alleyways of this town. Martha's daughter, Eliza, stands at the forefront, a fragile figure against the tide of fury. I see the resignation in her posture, the way the wind catches her hair like it's trying to lift her away from this nightmare. I didn't do anything, she cries, a plea that hangs suspended in the air, brittle as spun glass. But the truth means nothing now, it is the whisper of a lost dream, drowned under the weight of hysteria. I remember, she murmurs, the stories of the moon and the stars, of magic and wonder. But the magic has turned dark. The stars have hidden their faces, the moon weeps for those accused. Thomas stands frozen, grappling with the enormity of what is unfolding. What have we become, he asks, the question swirling in the air, heavy and suffocating. He dreams of a society where truth reigns, where the innocent don't dance on the edge of the blade, but the world is a canvas smeared with shades of doubt. In this moment, he faces a haunting realization, the law he once upheld is now a tool of oppression, wielded by the very people he sought to protect. The gallows creak, a sinister sound that sends a ripple of dread through the crowd. A child's wail pierces the silence, a reminder that innocence is caught in the crossfire. I remember the laughter, the child cries, echoing the longing in my heart. Will we ever laugh again? The faces around me blur, merging into a mass of turmoil, but I lock onto Martha's gaze, searching for understanding. She's a reflection of us all, a mother torn between loyalty to her child and the fear of a world where witches hide behind masks of normalcy. Her tears glisten in the torchlight, each drop a testament to the agony of choice. I remember when trust was a virtue, she whispers, her voice barely audible over the chaos. The executioner steps forward, the rope in his hands, a serpent poised to strike. Eliza's eyes widen, she sees her future slipping away, dreams of love and laughter turning to ash in her mouth. I didn't choose this, she screams, desperation spilling from her lips. This is madness. Madness, indeed. The crowd's frenzy reaches a fever pitch, a cacophony of fear and fury. They crave blood, a sacrifice to quell their own anxieties, to soothe their restless souls tangled in the web of uncertainty. I remember the warmth of summer, I think, longing for a time untouched by despair. As the rope is tightened, Thomas steps forward, his heart pounding. Wait, he shouts, a voice breaking through the din, we are not monsters. The words hang in the air, trembling like a fragile thread. But the crowd doesn't want salvation, they want a scapegoat. They want someone to pay for their suffering. Martha stands, torn between instinct and reason, the lines of her face etched with pain. I remember love, she cries, the kind that fights against the darkness. But love is a withered flower in this harsh landscape. The confrontation looms, an emotional storm building between the characters, a tempest fueled by ignorance, fear, and the haunting legacy of the witch hunts. The moment stretches, a taut string ready to snap, and as I watch, I know this is not just about Eliza. It is about all of us, bound by a history that refuses to let us go. In this time and space, echoes of the past ripple into the future, a reminder that the legacy of fear weaves through the very fabric of humanity. The gallows loom, a ghostly silhouette against the moonlit sky, and I stand frozen, caught in the web of their stories, a tapestry of pain, a haunting reminder of what justice has become. The heart races, the clock ticks, and we know this moment will define us. Will we let the shadows consume us, or will we find the courage to step into the light? The wind howled through the skeletal trees, a mournful cry echoing in the night. Shadows danced on the walls of the old stone cottage, flickering like the last breaths of a dying flame. A figure huddled in the corner, trembling. Amelia. She was a witch, or at least that's what the villagers had cried in a fit of fear and fury. Her fingers trembled as they clutched an ancient book, its pages yellowed and frayed, filled with whispers of magic and despair. The weight of it pressed down on her soul, the very ink an accusation. Witch, they had screamed. Sorceress. A knock shattered the silence, splintering her thoughts. It was David, her brother, his face pale, eyes wide. He was drenched in the rain, a wild storm raging outside, but it wasn't the tempest that frightened him. They're coming, he gasped, and the world tilted on its axis. How long had it been since she felt the warmth of love? Since the laughter of childhood echoed in the halls? I remember, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread woven into the darkness, when we used to run through the meadows, chasing sunlight and dreams. But dreams had turned into nightmares, and the meadows were now haunted by accusations and fear. David's face was a storm of emotions, torn between loyalty and the unrelenting pull of societal judgment. You have to leave, he insisted, though his heart screamed otherwise. The conflict raged within him, a tempest of love and terror. They won't listen. They'll see you as a monster. A crack of thunder rumbled like the gods themselves were angry, shaking the very foundations of their world. Amelia's breath quickened, a raw panic clawing at her throat. What had she done to deserve this? I only wanted to heal, to help, she choked, her words a haunting melody in the cacophony of the storm. Outside, the village was alive with shouts, torches held high like the very flames of hell. Betrayal stirred in the air, thick and suffocating. She could see the flickers through the cracks in her wooden door, a twisted reflection of the past. Once, those faces had smiled at her, welcomed her into their homes. Now, they were painted with fear and hatred, twisted by the very ignorance they clung to. A memory flickered, fierce and bright, a young girl flipping through the pages of an old spellbook, laughter filling the air, her mother's voice weaving tales of old enchantments, the scent of herbs and hope. What if it was all a lie? Amelia thought, but was it? The very essence of witchcraft had been misunderstood, twisted into a weapon, a reflection of society's darkest fears. David's hand gripped her shoulder, grounding her, his voice fierce and low. "We can run, Amelia. We can escape this madness." But could they escape the shadows looming over them? Could they outrun the very beliefs that had festered in the hearts of their kin? The storm raged, rain drumming a frantic heartbeat against the roof. Every drop carried whispers, tales of old, of power that had once been revered and now condemned. Tales of ancient witches who danced with the moon, who held the keys to healing and destruction, power mingling like sweet wine, intoxicating yet deadly. "I remember the stories," Amelia murmured, her pulse quickening. "The wisdom, the strength, it was never evil." The words were a balm, but they were also a curse. In literature, witches had been both saviors and demons, heroines and harbingers of doom. The pendulum of perception swung wildly, a chaotic dance of light and dark. David's eyes searched hers, searching for something, a flicker of hope amidst the despair. "But what if they don't see that?" The pain in his voice echoed through the storm, a haunting melody that resonated deep within her. "What if all they see is their fear?" And there it was. Their fear. The very thing that bound them to this moment, to this cottage, to the history that had painted witches as villains. It was a tapestry woven with blood and fire, a narrative that had thrived on misunderstanding and malice. "Amelia!" The shout rang out, a piercing cry that sliced through the storm. The villagers were close, their voices a chaotic chorus of rage, a symphony of fear. The door rattled, a sinister prelude to the storm's crescendo. "We have to make a choice," David said, desperation clawing at his throat. "Fight or flee." He was a warrior, but even warriors could be broken. Amelia felt the weight of the past pressing into her, memories of stories long forgotten, of women who had walked the earth with grace, power, and resilience. "What if I stand?" she whispered, the words spilling from her lips like a spell. "What if I show them who I am?" But the voice in her heart trembled, a flicker of doubt. The world had changed, twisted by time and terror. In the eyes of the villagers, she was a monster, a vessel of their darkest fears. Another crash of thunder, and the door shuddered under the weight of their fury. "Amelia," they shouted again, the name a dagger in the night. "Come out! We know what you've done." For a moment, time froze, and she felt the weight of ages pressing down upon her, a confluence of histories, of women who had faced their own trials, of those who had been burned and silenced. The echoes of their pain mingled with her own, a haunting symphony of grief and defiance. "I remember," she murmured, her voice a whisper against the storm. "I remember the power we held, the love we shared." In that moment, she understood. It wasn't just about her life. It was about the legacies of those before her, the silenced voices woven into the fabric of history. If she stood for them all. The door splintered as shadows surged toward her, hungry for blood, for vengeance. But in that chaos, she felt a surge of strength, a flicker of light against the encroaching darkness. Together, she breathed, gripping David's hand, their hearts beating in sync like the drums of fate. "We'll face them together." In the eye of the storm, as the winds howled and the world trembled, Amelia and David prepared to confront the darkness that had, for so long, shackled their truths. But what awaited them beyond the door? Would it be the reckoning they feared, or the awakening of a truth long buried? As the door burst open, light and darkness collided. Shadows writhed and twisted, and with it, a new chapter of witchcraft unfolded, where perceptions would shift, revealing the beauty and the terror entwined in the fabric of humanity itself. And as the wind screamed, the tales of the past beckoned, whispering of struggles yet to come, trails yet to blaze, and the battle for understanding that would echo through the ages. A single drop of sweat fell from her brow, carving a path down her temple as she stood at the intersection of fear and fury. The chatter of the crowd buzzed like a swarm of angry hornets, each voice a sharp jab against her fragile heart. "She's lying. She must be punished," they cried, faces contorted, eyes ablaze with an ancient rage. In that moment, Clara felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her, as if the ghosts of women past were wrapping their icy fingers around her throat, squeezing tighter with each accusation hurled her way. Clara's hands trembled. She glanced at the faces surrounding her, some twisted with contempt, others peering with a twisted glee, as if waiting for a spectacle, a macabre show. She remembered the last time she was in this square, the sun shining through the leaves, laughter echoing in what felt like another lifetime. But now, shadows stretched long, and the sun was nothing but a distant memory. I remember the way the laughter danced in the air, she thought, choking on her breath, before the whispers of betrayal took root. Across the square, Kyle stood with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, heart pounding as he witnessed the unraveling of everything he held dear. Clara, his sister, his childhood protector, the girl who always knew how to make him laugh, now stood on the precipice of a storm that threatened to swallow her whole. How did it come to this, he thought, his chest tightening. The world around him felt surreal, like a painting where the colors had run together, leaving only darkness. "Clara, please," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos, but it was swallowed by the roiling tide of accusations. "You know this isn't true. Don't let them take you." But she didn't look at him, her gaze was fixed on the ground, on the cobblestones that had witnessed centuries of innocence lost, lives shattered. "I remember when we played in the grass," she thought, dreaming of adventures beyond these walls. Now, those dreams lay fractured, shards of glass scattered at her feet. The crowd surged forward, a writhing mass of bodies, each person moving like a puppet, strings pulled by an unseen hand. "Witch! Witch!" they chanted, their voices rising and falling like a grotesque wave, each utterance a dagger aimed straight for Clara's heart. Her breath quickened, staccato bursts of panic clawing at her throat. What if it's true, it whispered in her mind, that insidious voice that came not from the crowd but from the depths of her own soul. What if I am what they say? And then, a figure stepped into the light, a man cloaked in authority, his features cold and unyielding. The judge. A ghost in his own right, haunted by the weight of decisions that would drape themselves over the years like a shroud. "You stand accused," he pronounced, voice dripping with a finality that echoed through the chilling air. "What say you?" Kyle felt the ground shift beneath him as if the very earth had opened to swallow the hope from his heart. The weight of the judge's words struck him, each syllable a hammer on the anvil of his fears. "Clara," he shouted again, desperate, but it felt like he was screaming into a void. The crowd was a sea, and he was but a lonely island, drowning in a tempest of madness. He wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice, but he felt the suffocating reality settle over him like a funeral shroud. I remember screams, Clara thought, memories clawing at her, dragging her back to a time when accusations could tear a community apart. The whispers of her neighbors, once filled with warmth, now buzzed with venom. She felt the hot sting of tears in her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I won't give them the satisfaction," she vowed silently. But like a marionette, her heart danced to the tune of their derision, bouncing between defiance and despair. "Remember what Mother said," she recalled, voice echoing in the chambers of her mind. "The truth will set you free." But what if the truth was twisted? What if it wrapped around her like vines, squeezing tighter until she could no longer breathe? "I am not what they say," she shouted, voice cracking, a sliver of hope piercing through the darkness. But would they listen? Did they even care? The crowd hesitated, a ripple of uncertainty crashing against the shore of their fervor. Their convictions, once a tidal wave, became a still pond for a brief moment. And in that space, Kyle took a step forward, heart on his sleeve, raw and bleeding. "You're not alone, Clara," he cried, a plea for unity amidst the chaos. "They're wrong. I know you." His words hung in the air, a fragile lifeline reaching for her. "Do you really know me?" Clara thought, voice shaking. "What if I'm the monster they say? What if I'm just as flawed?" The shadows around her closed in, whispering secrets of doubt. The sincerity in Kyle's eyes pierced through the fog of uncertainty, igniting a flicker of strength within her. "I remember you, Kyle," she thought, warmth blooming amid the ice. "You've always been my light." But before she could reach for him, the crowd roared back to life, the moment of clarity shattered like glass. "She's a temptress! A deceiver!" They surged forward again, a chanting mass, each word a hook in her chest. The judge's gavel fell, a thunderous roar of finality that echoed like a heartbeat, her heartbeat, against the stark silence of her impending doom. In that chaotic dance of accusation and fear, Clara felt time stretch like a taut string, ready to snap. We are not so different, she thought, glancing into the eyes of her accusers, all of us bound by fear, by the ghosts of our past. The shadows whispered around her, pulling at her resolve, begging her to succumb to their promise of protection. But deep within her, a fire ignited, roaring against the chill of despair. I remember who I am, she thought fiercely, standing taller in the face of the storm. I remember strength. And so, the lines were drawn, between the hunted and the hunters, between fear and defiance. The crowd became a cacophony, a living, breathing testament to the darkness of humanity. Clara and Kyle stood at the center, two souls intertwined in a moment of reckoning, where love battled against a tide of hysteria, where truth fought for breath in a world that had forgotten its meaning. In that heart-stopping moment, time stood still, the weight of their collective fears hovering, waiting to shatter in a thunderous climax. The air crackled with the energy of a storm about to break, a storm that would either cleanse or destroy. The echoes of accusation faded into a whisper, as the true battle unfolded, not just against the demons of the crowd, but against the shadows lurking within. The air crackled with tension that day. A woman stood at the center of that dirt-streaked square, her eyes wide, brimming with fear that felt like it could shatter the very sky. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that twisted and danced like the very demons they accused her of consorting with. I remember the whispers, how they slithered through the crowd like snakes through dry grass, biting at the heels of every heart that dared listen. Witch! Witch, they cried, voices rising in a fevered pitch, each syllable a dagger plunging deeper into the fabric of justice. And there was young Miriam, trembling at the edge of the mob, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles shone white. She hadn't wanted to be here, yet the streets of Salem had called her forth like a siren beckoning sailors to their doom. Her skin prickled, thoughts of her mother, the way she used to stir the pot in their tiny home, blending herbs and whispers into remedies meant to heal, flooded her mind. If they found out about her mother, about the secrets wrapped in the family's ancient quilt, would they burn it too? Would the fire consume them both, mothers and daughters, lost to the ashes of ignorance? Then there was Daniel, his gaze locked on the woman, the noose dangling ominously above her head, a macabre halo. His heart pounded, a drumbeat of guilt and helplessness. He had known her, laughed with her, shared secrets beneath the shade of the old oak tree where they carved their names into the bark, a promise of forever. But now, the weight of the world pressed down on his shoulders, heavy with the knowledge that to stand with her was to stand against the very fabric of the town that raised him. Justice, he thought bitterly, was a fickle mistress. What good was justice if it burned the innocent at the stake? Do you see them? Miriam whispered, her voice barely a thread above the cacophony. The townsfolk were like shades, their faces twisted with a mix of fear and exhilaration as if the very act of condemning her could cleanse their own souls. Do you see the way they look at her? Like she's not even human. Daniel swallowed hard. They think they're saving themselves, he murmured, but all they're doing is digging their graves deeper. He looked back at Miriam, her eyes glistening with tears, and his heart cracked open like an unsealed letter, spilling all his fears. What if they come for us next? The crowd surged, a living, breathing beast, hungry for blood. And in that moment, it was as if time stuttered. The clock on the old church tower ticked louder, each chime echoing the heartbeat of their darkest fears. The woman in the center was now silent, her defiance flickering like a candle in a storm. She raised her chin, eyes aflame with a strange, fierce light. I do not fear death, she declared, and her voice cut through the din, sharp and clear, like the crack of thunder. I fear the hearts of those who judge without knowing. Miriam felt a ripple pass through the crowd. Hope? Or was it something darker? The townsfolk recoiled, as if the woman's words held the power to unmask their own sins. She spoke of prejudice, of fear born from ignorance, each syllable a shadow that danced in the minds of those who dared listen. The air thickened with palpable tension, and for a heartbeat of a moment, Miriam dared to dream. What if they stopped? What if they realized the monster isn't the witch, but the mob? Daniel's eyes flicked to Miriam. We can't let them do this, he breathed, desperation clawing at him. We must, what? Miriam's voice trembled, the weight of reality crashing down around them. What can we do? We're just two voices in a sea of madness. But even as she said it, something stirred within her, a spark igniting against the backdrop of despair. But if we stay silent, are we not complicit? Are we not just as guilty? The crowd roared, a wave of madness crashing over the last remnants of reason. The fear of the unknown had twisted their hearts, prejudice, like a serpent, coiled tightly around their minds, squeezing until they could not breathe. The woman's defiance hung in the air like smoke, thick, choking, burning. Miriam could feel it creeping into her lungs, filling her with an intoxicating mix of fear and bravery. Then, a moment, a gasp that echoed through the crowd. The woman fell to her knees, hands raised to the heavens, pleading for mercy, pleading for understanding. Would they listen? Or would the flames consume them all, leaving nothing but charred ruins and the echo of their ignorance? Daniel stepped forward, heart racing. Stop, he shouted, the word ripping through the chaos, raw and jagged. You're all chasing shadows. We can't sacrifice a life to save our own souls. His voice soared, carrying the weight of their shared history, their laughter, their secrets, and the undeniable truth that they were all flawed, imperfect beings. But silence reigned. The crowd paused, uncertainty mingling with their fanaticism. Miriam's heart thundered in her chest. This was the moment. The line had been drawn, fear or courage, ignorance or enlightenment. She stepped beside Daniel, feeling the heat of the woman's defiance flicker in her own spirit. Listen to her, she cried, her voice like steel. Listen to the truth in her words. We are not defined by our fears, but by how we choose to face them. But then, the crack of a whip, the chill of a voice sharper than any blade. What are you doing? It was the voice of authority, a distant echo of a long-gone age, clinging to power like a drowning man to a sinking ship. The crowd stirred, a wave of confusion and anger bubbling to the surface. Would they listen to the truth? Or would they bury it beneath their fears, blinded by their own prejudices? Miriam's heart raced as she realized the truth. They stood on the precipice of something monumental, an awakening that could change everything. But at what cost? Each breath felt like a struggle, a battle against the tide of history that threatened to consume them. And in that moment, the world spun wildly, and time seemed to stretch infinitely. The flames licked higher, and the echoes of the past reverberated, mingling with the sharp taste of the future, uncertain, terrifying, full of promise. Would justice triumph? Or would ignorance bathe the town in shadows, burying them deeper than the very ashes of the condemned? The tension was unbearable, the silence deafening, a breath held in time, a heartbeat waiting to break free. And as the crowd held their breath, the air shimmered with the possibility of change, heavy and electric. What awaited them in the shadows? Only time would tell, as the night began to close in, a curtain veiling the drama yet to unfold. The night was thick with a suffocating silence, as if the world held its breath, waiting for the inevitable scream. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum signaling the arrival of doom, the weight of history pressing down on my shoulders. The flickering torchlight danced in the darkness, casting long shadows that twisted and contorted like the souls of the damned. I could feel the fear in the air, a living thing, wrapping around my throat, squeezing tighter with every pulse of my terrified heart. I remember Clara, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her fingers trembling, clutching the hem of her tattered dress. Her cheeks were stained with dirt and desperation, but it was the fire inside her that drew me in, an unquenchable flame flickering against the cold, hard reality of the gallows. "They'll come for me next," she whispered, and my stomach twisted. How could we still be here? How was it possible that the world had not yet moved past this grotesque theater of cruelty? And there was Thomas, the town's healer, a man who wore wisdom like a tattered cloak, frayed at the edges but rich with experience. He peered from the shadows, his gaze piercing through the darkness, searching for safety in the faces of the crowd. I saw the conflict warring within him, the instinct to protect and the bitter knowledge that his voice could be the next one silenced. "They're wrong," he murmured under his breath, as if the very air could betray him. "Witches? No, they are simply afraid. But fear was a monster, gnashing its teeth, hungry for blood. I remember the sky, the moon a sickly yellow, casting a ghastly glow on the gathering. The scent of damp earth mingled with the acrid stench of burning wood, and I could almost taste the tension in the air. Each heartbeat echoed in my ears, magnified by the collective dread of the townsfolk, a symphony of unease that crescendoed as the clock ticked closer to the hour of reckoning. We stood on the precipice of madness, a community spiraling into chaos, driven by suspicion and hatred. In this desperate time, Clara clutched my arm, her voice a trembling whisper, "They'll burn her alive, won't they?" The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of inevitability. A chill ran down my spine, not just at her words, but at the thought of what lay ahead. A woman accused, a pyre waiting. I felt like a ghost in that moment, trapped in the echoes of my own helplessness. Through the throngs of people, I caught a glimpse of the accused, a woman with wild hair and sunken cheeks, whose eyes held a storm of defiance. She stood there, a lone figure against the tide of accusation, a candle flickering in the biting wind. I felt a rush of admiration and sorrow. She was a warrior in a battle of shadows and whispers, fighting against an army of ignorance. But ignorance was a voracious beast, devouring the innocent, and I could see how it feasted on our fears. The whispers among the crowd grew louder, emboldened by a shared hatred that fed on the darkness of human nature. Witch! Witch, the chants became a mantra, reverberating through the night like a spell cast in malice. Each repetition pierced my heart, slashing through the veil of rational thought, drowning out reason beneath the weight of superstition. Yet, amidst this chaos, I saw the flicker of something else, an ember of rationalism, a spark of thought that began to take root in the minds of some. Thomas, his face grim, began to speak, his voice steady, cutting through the frenzy. "Listen. There is no magic here, only fear and ignorance blinding us." I watched as he fought against the tide, his words a lifeline tossed into a storm. "We are on the cusp of something greater, knowledge, logic. We can rise above this darkness." But the crowd was a beast, hungry for blood, and logic was a fragile thing, easily crushed beneath the weight of hysteria. I could see the struggle reflected in Clara's eyes, the battle between her heart and her mind. "What if they're right?" she whispered, doubt crawling into her voice like a snake. "What if we're the ones who are wrong?" The darkness shifted, shadows swirling like the smoke from the pyre yet to be lit. I felt a surge of anger rise within me, a visceral need to protect her, to shield her from the encroaching despair. "No," I said fiercely, feeling the heat of my own conviction. "We cannot let fear dictate our reality. There is strength in reason, in understanding." The clock struck, a monstrous sound that shattered the moment, echoing in the hollow spaces of my soul. I felt the air thicken, the crowd exhaling a collective breath, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. Clara clutched my hand tighter, her knuckles white, and in that moment, I realized that we were all at the edge of a precipice, a world on the brink of awakening, fighting to emerge from the shadows. But there, in the flickering light of the torch, the spectre of ignorance loomed larger than life, a grotesque reminder of our humanity's darkest depths. And as the soldiers dragged the accused toward the gallows, I felt despair claw at my throat. How could we allow this? How could we be so blind? The confrontation was imminent, a clash of wills and beliefs, and I stood there, caught in the crossfire, a witness to the fragile, terrifying transition from one age to another. The shadows whispered promises of a new dawn, but the darkness was persistent, hungry for one last bite. In that chilling tableau, I understood the essence of our struggle, a struggle that would echo through the ages, a battle not just against the fear of witches, but against the very demons that dwelled within us all. As the flames flickered to life, I felt the pulse of history beneath my skin, the heartbeat of change, and I knew this was just the beginning. This was not an end, but merely a painful chapter in our story, a transition into a world where reason and understanding would rise like the dawn, fighting against the suffocating grip of superstition. And so we stood, at the edge of terror, hearts racing, eyes fixed on the horizon, ready to embrace the storm. The air crackled with tension outside the small-town courthouse, where whispers clung to the walls like shadows. The flickering streetlights cast long, jagged shapes that danced along the pavement, mimicking the turmoil brewing within. I stood there, heart pounding, lungs tight with the weight of uncertainty. The sound of a gavel echoed through the building, a cold reminder of justice twisted by fear. Fear, an ancient, primal force that drags us back into the dark. I remember Clara. The way her laughter would ripple through our backyard, a melody brightening even the gloomiest days. I remember the way she wore her long, black hair like a crown, defiant against the mundane. But now, Clara stood shackled to the whispers of the townsfolk, her spirit caught in a web of misunderstanding that could suffocate even the strongest of souls. They called her a witch. They called her cursed. The accusation lingered in the air, thick as fog, clinging to us like a shriek of banshees at midnight. Across the street, I saw Sarah, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She was always the first to defend Clara, always the one to counter the creeping shadows of doubt. But today, she was a mere reflection of her former self, haunted, trembling. What happened to us echoed in the spaces between the thrumming of my heart. The townspeople once embraced Clara's quirks, her breathtaking ability to heal with herbs, to connect with the unseen. But vulnerability breeds suspicion, and fear breeds monsters. Witchcraft, they shouted, as if the word itself could summon demons from their graves. The word, an incendiary device igniting the hearts of the fearful, spreading flames of hysteria. I watched Sarah's hands tremble as she clutched the placard, innocent. Words meant to shield, but they felt like reeds against a tidal wave. We are not safe. We are not innocent. Moments flashed like fireflies, illuminating the depths of despair. I remember Clara sitting cross-legged in the grass, reading the cosmos in the stars, her fingers dancing through the night. Everything has a spirit. Everything can whisper back, she would say, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I was so naive then, so quick to believe in the magic of the world. But now, shadows encroached upon that light. Did you see what she did? They said, pointing fingers like arrows. She cursed my crops. She stole my husband's heart. The accusations spiraled, each one more outrageous than the last. Clara had never been anything but love in a world that seemed hell-bent on fear. But love, it seemed, was as fragile as glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Why did you fight for her? I asked Sarah, our breaths mingling in the cold air, each puff a small cloud of desperation. You could have just stayed quiet. The bitterness of the accusation hung heavily between us, weighted by regret. But her eyes were fierce, alight with a fire I couldn't extinguish. Because she's my friend, she whispered, her voice trembling under the strain of the truth. But friendship, when wrapped in the shroud of witchcraft, is a dangerous game. If you stand with her, you'll be next, they warned, their words dripping with foreboding. The abyss of their hatred yawned wide, threatening to swallow us whole. Did they not see? Did they not feel? We were all entangled in this twisted nightmare. And then, the moment arrived. The courthouse doors swung open, and Clara stepped out, a spirit battered but unbroken. Her face, pale yet luminous, bore the marks of accusation and resilience. I could hardly breathe, my chest constricted by the enormity of it all. I am not a witch. Her voice rang out, clear and fierce, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. But the darkness hung heavy, an oppressive force that sought to drown her light. The townsfolk were a tapestry of fury and disbelief, their faces contorted in ways that seemed almost otherworldly. I felt a pang of deep sorrow, this was not how it was meant to be. The world felt small as I watched them close in, a gathering storm of doubt and rage. Their eyes, once warm, now flickered with suspicion, like candles in a tempest, threatening to extinguish any remnants of hope. You don't know me. You've never tried. Clara's plea was raw, a wound exposed to the elements. But hearts were closed, shutters drawn tight against the brilliance she offered. To know her was to accept vulnerability, to embrace the messiness of life, and who could bear that burden? Clara! I screamed, my voice lost in the cacophony of angry shouts. You are magic! But the words fell flat, absorbed by the weight of disbelief, the heat of accusation sweeping through the crowd like wildfire. I turned to Sarah, her face twisted in anguish as she clutched the placard tighter, knuckles white against the darkening sky. What if they take her? She stammered, her fear spilling over like rain from the heavens. What if they burn her? The thought pierced me, a knife to the gut. The echoes of history rang in my ears, of trials, of pyres, of fear consuming the innocent. It felt as if the ghosts of our ancestors whispered warnings through the chill of the night. They're still out there, I thought, the echoes of those who fell victim to accusations born of ignorance. Clara's eyes met mine briefly, a flicker of recognition, and in that moment, I felt a cosmic connection, a shared heartbeat echoing through the void. I won't let them take you, I whispered, though it felt like a vow woven from threads of despair. But the night was far from over. The confrontation loomed like the clouds above, heavy with threat. I felt the tension rising, thick as fog, winding its way around us, squeezing the breath from our lungs. The world outside shrank, fading into the background, while the storm within our hearts raged on. Witchcraft, they shouted again, the word a chant, a spell to bind us all. And as the crowd surged forward, the air became electric, charged with fear and fury, and yet, there was a flicker of something else, too. A glimmer of hope buried within the chaos, waiting to be unearthed. The hands that once caressed the earth now reached for the sword. We were on the brink of a confrontation, the air thick with unresolved tension and sorrow. The line was drawn. Clara, the misunderstood, stood against the tide of ignorance. And somewhere, deep within the fray, Sarah and I clenched our fists, hearts racing, ready to fight against the rising darkness, against the echoes of a past that refused to fade. All I could think was, this was just the beginning.